Unforeseen Danger, a Detective Liv DeMarco thriller by g.k.parks, read by L.W. Salinas. 10. The modeling agency is still our best bet. I skewered a slice of avocado and popped it into my mouth. Keith Richardson didn't work at Rogers & Stein, but the agency hires a lot of freelancers, photographers mostly, and they see dozens of women every day. It makes the most sense. That's probably where Keith met Jane. Fennel poked at his salad, his eyes constantly roaming the restaurant. Lila worked here. It's close enough to the modeling agency for Richardson's daily lunch trips to be feasible, if he even worked there. But that's assuming a lot. You're guessing he did some kind of freelance work for them, and that Jane Doe was one of their models, or auditioning to be a model. Speculation is all we have right now. Do you have a better theory? Have you looked around? I turned my head. The place wasn't upscale, and the menu didn't offer much in variety. It was a mid-level restaurant and dry. As a rule, executives and models both enjoyed drinking. No one at Rogers & Stein would have recommended this place. Hell, I doubt they even know it exists. Something out the window caught Brad's eye. Maybe we're looking at this all wrong. I agree. Richardson must have known things about the women he abducted and the one he killed. Assuming, of course, he's behind the abductions. Seems like a safe bet. Brad nodded, continuing to follow his train of thought. But maybe they didn't have work in common. Nikki could have gotten it wrong. She didn't even know Abigail had been out of work for a month, so we shouldn't assume she knows how Abigail met Keith. Okay, so where does that put us? Back at square one? Not necessarily. 2 of the victims worked the streets. Lila worked here, and Abigail worked everywhere and nowhere. He took a final bite and chewed. The victims must have something else in common. We've gone over it 100 times. Missing Persons went over it too. We didn't find any commonalities. I'm not even sure the 4 victims are connected. And without knowing more about Jane Doe, we can't exactly build a profile on her. I pulled a pen out of my purse and reached for a clean napkin. Okay, let's toss out anything we can't solidly connect. Prostitutes are gone. Right. I wrote our jumper's name in the middle. Keith dated Abigail Booker, so we keep her. He ate at this restaurant for a week prior to Lila James's disappearance, so she stays. And ballistics matched the gun, so he killed Jane Doe. And we know Laurel and Hardy impersonated FBI agents, broke into the morgue, and stole the bodies. Yeah. I continued drawing lines from the names to additional pieces of evidence we possessed. The gun, the stolen van, the snow globe, the gold bracelet and charm. Laurel and Hardy have accents. That's what Emerson said. For all we know, they could be from Texas. Or Germany. Emerson wasn't particularly forthcoming. I glanced at my phone. Agent Peters hadn't called back. Mac and the techs were split between processing the ME's office and assisting the FBI in determining how the garage was breached. The men were caught on camera, but they had convincing fake FBI credentials. How did they get those? Are we sure the Bureau isn't screwing with us? Brad reached into his wallet. Since I bought dinner, he left the tip. I'm not sure of anything. He jerked his chin out the window. It's a nice night. Let's take a walk. And depending on how that goes, maybe we'll take a drive to the warehouse district and see how Agent Peters is faring. The captain won't be happy about that. He doesn't need to know. Fennel kept his focus out the window. Something had caught his attention. I stuffed the napkin into my bag and grabbed my phone. Do you have a theory? Or a destination? I'm working on it. We left the restaurant and strolled down the street. We were only a few blocks from where we conducted surveillance a few nights ago. Grayson assigned Sullivan and Loyola to keep watch for anything hinky in our absence. However, the streets appeared quiet, but it was still early. We turned at the next intersection and stopped in front of the community center. None of our victims were financially solvent. They were scraping by. Maybe they needed a hand, Brad suggested. Lila was doing okay. She was a student. I've seen her bills. Most of her expenses were covered by student loans. What she earned at the restaurant went for incidentals and outside acting classes. He read the sign on the door. For Richardson to realize our victims were easy prey, he'd have to be paying attention, or the women volunteered the information. What are you thinking? Soup kitchen, shelters, free clinics, that sort of thing? They weren't exactly indigent. All 4 of them have known addresses. They didn't need a handout. Although I didn't know how reliable our intel was when it came to the working girls. And Lila worked at a restaurant. That place might not be the best, but she could have gotten scraps or leftovers to take home. Brad gave me a sideways glance and pointed at the window. Free health screenings and physicals. So? None of them had health insurance. Lila could have gone to the clinic on campus. Medical records were harder to come by due to privacy laws, so I couldn't be certain of my assertion. Sure, if she was sick or needed birth control. But she needed to have a physical to participate in community theater. And since this place is close to where she acted and worked, she might have come here instead. This is a stretch, Fennel. It won't hurt to ask around. We've checked everywhere else. Even though it was late, he pushed the door open. I frowned, wondering why the community center wasn't locked up tight. As if reading my mind, Brad pointed to the sign. AA meeting, room 103. They won't talk to us. It was the nature of AA. Answering our questions would defeat the anonymous part. Sure they will. He grinned. You're afraid I have a problem, so I think I should go to a meeting just to make sure I don't. If nothing else, it'll put your mind at ease. He winked. And I love proving you wrong. This is such a bad idea, I mumbled, following Brad down the hall and into the meeting. They started 40 minutes ago, so we ducked into the room and found unobtrusive seats near the back. When they were finished, the man in charge approached us. He introduced himself as David, disrupting the illusion of true anonymity. But I didn't point out the hypocrisy. I'm Brad. This is my partner, Liv. Welcome. David shook hands with each of us, believing Brad and I were romantically involved. I haven't seen you here before. First time, Brad said. Do you normally attend a different meeting? David asked. No. Brad looked at me. We just stepped in on a whim. Liv's afraid my drinking is out of control, so we're trying to be proactive. We should talk. David eyed me curiously. Help yourself to coffee and donuts. I gave Brad a curious look. This would give me a chance to question the others, but I wasn't sure he was prepared to be cornered about a potential problem that he probably didn't even have. Honestly, he said he was fine, but I still worried about him. Maybe he had a problem and this was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Or maybe I was overthinking our cover. Go on, hon. Grab a coffee. 1 for me too, please. Brad jerked his chin at the table. You know how I take it. I shuffled away, eyeing the 24 remaining people. They broke into small groups of 2 to 3, hiding behind their coffee cups and donuts. Addiction came in plenty of forms. Even though this was an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, I wasn't convinced a few of them hadn't dabbled with other vices. Regardless, it was refreshing to see people actively trying to better their lives and recover. I smiled at two women as I moved to the table in the back. Grabbing a paper cup from the stack, I placed it under the spout. With the cup 3/4 full, I examined the sweeteners. Pink, blue, yellow, or white, a man said, stepping up beside me. He grabbed several white packets and tore off the tops before dumping them into a cup and snagging a glazed donut. He gave me the quick once-over. Wait, don't tell me. Let me guess. Blue? Actually, I was hoping for brown. His forehead wrinkled. Brown? Raw sugar. Ah, a purist. He put the donut in his mouth to free up one of his hands and dug through the packets, pulling out 4 from the bottom. After handing them to me, he took the donut out of his mouth. Will that do? That's plenty. Thank you. No problem. He turned his back to the table and surveyed the room. Place was starting to empty out. Glad to see some new faces. I'm Jessie, by the way. Liv. I watched a few people wander out. It looks like a good-sized crowd. How many people usually show up? I don't know. 30? 35? He took another bite of his donut. I got my 90-day chip today. Congratulations. He snickered. A part of me wants to celebrate with a few beers. Isn't that crazy? No, but it's not a good idea. Yeah, I know. So, it's burnt coffee and a soggy donut. He glanced back at the nearly empty box. You might want to grab one before the rest disappear. I don't do grains. That would make giving up drinking a lot easier. God, what's left? Wine? I shrugged. You ever hang out around here? Jessie asked. I do some volunteer work for the community center. Charity drives, bake sales, stuff like that. I can't say that I do. I probably wouldn't either, except it's court-mandated. It's why I started coming to this meeting. I turned to face him. Do you know Keith? Jessie chewed on the last piece of his donut and wiped his mouth with his thumb. You mean Tobias? Tobias Keith? He works the front desk. He reached for another donut and studied my expression. Maybe. What does he look like? He's like this tall. He gestured with the donut. Dark hair, glasses. Thin, like lean muscle thin, like runner thin. Not sick thin or addict thin. Just thin. That sounds like him. What did you say his name was? Tobias Keith. You know, kinda like the singer. I used to give him a hard time about it every time I saw him. Jessie took another bite and spoke with his mouth full. Come to think of it, I haven't seen him in a couple of days. Does he normally come to these meetings? Nah, he just works the front desk. Is that how you heard the meeting moved here? My brain remained 2 steps behind, which wasn't good for a cop. You mean this is new? Jessie laughed. Yeah, we just started up 8 weeks ago. I used to attend the meeting they held in the church on 7th, but they closed down. So that's when the community center started holding it here. And since I was already in the area, it made sense to just stick around. He finished his donut and took a sip of coffee. How long has Tobias worked here? I don't know. Do you know Lila James? My questions were making him suspicious. How long have you been clean and sober? I thought back. The last time I had a drink was 3.5 weeks ago. Which wasn't a lie, I just wasn't a big drinker. One day at a time, right? Finding my answer satisfactory, Jessie said, Yeah, I know Lila. Everyone here knows Lila. She plastered every bulletin board in this building with posters for her upcoming show. He rolled his eyes. She's delusional to think anyone here gives a shit, but she's convinced it's her big break. Poor kid. She acts like she's opening on Broadway. She doesn't realize it's fucking community theater. He pressed his fingers to his lips. Pardon my language. What about... He drained his cup and tossed it in the trash. I get it. You're new. But this is AA. It's not about gossip or asking about other people. You need someone to talk to about your problems? I'm here to listen. But if not, I gotta bounce. Yeah, sure. I get it. I held up the raw sugar packets. Thanks for this. He bowed his head and went to speak to a woman with raven-colored hair on the other side of the room. Tobias Keith. Keith Richardson. Damn it, I was losing my touch or extremely dense. Keith Richards, Toby Keith. The jumper must have been a music fan. He probably thought he was clever to come up with those aliases. He probably got a kick out of the fake IDs, too. But that no longer mattered. First, we needed to make sure Tobias was the same man who plummeted from the roof. It looked like this may have been our abductor's hunting ground. We'd need to ask questions, but since the rest of the center was shut down for the night, it'd have to wait until the morning. I shook one of the sugar packets and tore off the top before pouring it into the cup. This new information left me jittery enough. The last thing I needed was coffee, but Brad might want one. And now that I had a potential lead, it was time to leave. I wandered back to Fennel and David. Here, honey. Brad took the cup and shook hands with David. Thanks for the information. No problem. I hope to see you again. Brad didn't say anything. He just nodded and placed a hand on the small of my back, guiding me to the door. On the way out, I snagged a flyer from a bulletin board. When we were safely outside, I asked, "Are you okay?" If you keep asking me that, I might start thinking I don't look very okay. He eyed me. Do I not look okay? You look fine. Only fine? I elbowed him in the ribs. Fishing for compliments? Just the truth. He stopped near a parked car and checked his reflection in the window. Don't you think I'm handsome? Not this again. I dragged him away from the car. Did you get anything useful out of the AA meeting? David didn't say anything. He wouldn't confirm any regular attendees, but I don't think Lila or Abigail had a drinking problem. I'll ask Nikki the next time we follow up, but I think she would have mentioned it. Plus, most addicts have a tendency to disappear, beg, borrow, and steal. And Lila and Abigail don't fit the bill. Lila disappeared from time to time. I remembered her coworkers mentioning that. And Jesse recognized her. Although he said it was from the posters. I handed the flyer to Brad. But it is possible she could have gone to a few meetings and he wanted to maintain her anonymity. He takes that very seriously. After filling in my partner on everything I learned, we drove to the warehouse district to check on the progress the feds were making. We needed a win. Even though Brad and I made some headway in discovering where and how Keith Richardson chose his victims, it wasn't enough. We needed more. A lot more. But at least now we knew where to look for answers. 11. You said no one would find the bodies! He bellowed. They didn't. He slammed his office door. He didn't need anyone to overhear his conversation. So why are the police and FBI scouring the buildings in the warehouse district? The van. Oleg poured a drink and sipped deeply. The liquor warmed his body, and he leaned back, balancing the glass on his thigh. You told us to deactivate the nav system, but the FBI must have other trackers in their vehicles. Did you forget? Maybe you made another mistake? He swore. He'd forgotten about the satellite tracking. What will they find? Ash. That's it? He needed the reassurance now more than ever. For a moment, he thought about his golden parachute. He could pull the ripcord, take the small fortune he'd accumulated, and run. He had contacts in Brazil. His buyers there were far more forgiving than the Russians. They might hide him or protect him, especially based on how much he was willing to pay. He could set up shop down there. It wouldn't be nearly as easy, but he could do it. He still had enough friends to make things happen. You should speak to Dmitri. He took over the disposal. Dmitri was a professional. He'd seen the man's work before. He used him a time or two when things had gotten out of hand. Accidents occasionally happened. Prospective buyers didn't always understand the rules or the consequences. And less often, the girls stepped out of line and had to be dealt with. Dmitri always handled those incidents, and nothing had ever bounced back on any of them. All right, thanks. Oleg chuckled. Not so fast. You realize my boss still expects a nubile blonde. A natural blonde. I haven't forgotten. She needs to be ready by tomorrow. You know what happens if you don't follow through. He leafed through a file on his desk. Hold on. He stepped into the hallway. As usual, the office was busy. Vera, bring me the file on Clarissa Behrens. I need to see something. My boss is not a patient man, and you're already under the gun. The voice on the other end of the line said. It's Keith's fault. He let Ingrid get away. I couldn't risk taking her back after the escape. I didn't know who she'd seen or spoken to. She could have jeopardized everything. She could have shown the others how she escaped. He abruptly stopped speaking when his assistant entered with the file. He took it from her and offered a polite smile. She returned the smile and left his office, closing the door behind her. Can't you explain the situation to your boss? He needs to understand this isn't my fault. I need more time. He won't understand. You know how this works. He read the file. No one would miss Clarissa Behrens. The girl had a terrible life, but she had one thing going for her. She was a natural blonde. Okay, I have someone in mind, but you'll have to make the pickup. Make sure it's a clean grab. Protect the girls. Grab the girls. I'm wondering why we need you. Never mind, I'll take care of it. She'll be delivered to the usual exchange spot. He can look over the merchandise and make his purchases. Very good. Hanging up, he rocked back in his chair. He had a list of associates, but with the police sniffing around, he'd been hesitant to enlist any of them. Unfortunately, he no longer had a choice. He dug the burner phone out of his bottom desk drawer and dialed a number. Detectives! Agent Peters waved us through the tape. I didn't expect to see you again tonight. We were in the neighborhood. I followed Peters into an abandoned processing plant, down a hallway, and into a large room with an industrial fan intended to prevent overheating. How do you know Laurel and Hardy came in here? Peters gave me a strange look. Oh, he chuckled. I get it. In the back of the room, several men in blue coveralls and latex gloves sifted through the remnants of the incinerator. The van pulled into the loading bay. It remained for less than 5 minutes before returning to the federal building. Fennel crouched down, examining the ashes and bone fragments. How long for extra crispy? This burns hot. A lot hotter than a crematorium. So I'd guess less than an hour. The tech pointed to several large bone fragments. And they didn't break all the way down to ash, so possibly less than that. Where's the on-off switch? Fennel asked. We dusted it. No prints. Peters looked around the abandoned plant. They split up, I said. One of them stayed here. The other returned the van. Did you pull nearby CCTV feeds? Detective DeMarco, I said the Bureau would share its findings. And I am a man of my word. Peters pointed to a few members of the PD's crime scene unit. As soon as we know anything, you're my first call. Fine, we'll get out of your way. Good night, detectives. Night, Brad said. When we got back to the car, he asked, What do you think, partner? Nothing good. Me neither. The men who took the bodies knew precisely how to get them and where to dispose of them. The FBI imposters know too much. Planned too well. They read like professional cleaners. But why? Keith Richardson was sloppy. He killed Jane Doe, left shell casings and bullets behind, and he had the murder weapon on his person when he committed suicide. Who would bother to go to this much trouble to clean up a killer's mess when the killer is already dead and we don't even know his real name? That's what we have to find out. I thought about what Brad said. Concealing Keith Richardson's identity is the only reason anyone would go to these extreme measures. Any idea why? I don't know, Liv. We remained silent for the rest of the ride. Our thoughts and theories too macabre to verbalize or share. Captain Grayson wouldn't be happy we detoured to the side of the body dump, but we needed to update him, despite the consequences. I offered to take the hit since my head was already on the chopping block. Grayson didn't scold or reprimand. He listened, made a few notations, picked up the phone, and told me to call it a night. He didn't want his detectives to burn the candle at both ends when there was nothing to be done until evidence was collected and businesses opened. I passed the order along, and Fennel made a note that we needed records from the community center. We'd probably start there, unless Agent Peters tracked down the imposters. I turned off the computer and stared at the corkboard. Photographs of the 4 missing women stared back at me. "We'll find you," I promised, but the words sounded hollow. By the time I got home that night, Emma was waiting for me. We hadn't spoken since Brad spilled the beans about the rooftop incident. I went to bed early last night to avoid seeing her when she got home from work, and I left for the station before she woke up this morning. So it was time I paid the piper. "Hey, Em." I shut the door, flipped the deadbolt, and latched the chain. "How was work?" Her tone was cold and bristly. "Fine." "Cool." I kicked off my shoes and hung my purse in the closet. Removing my gun, I unloaded it and put it on the kitchen counter. "Did you eat yet?" "Yes." She turned off the TV and came into the kitchen. "Sit down, Liv. We have to talk." I took a seat, wondering if I should move my gun out of Emma's reach. She stood on the other side of the counter and stared at me. "You know I love you, right? You're my family. I don't know where I'd be if it hadn't been for you and your parents." She took a deep breath and sighed. "But we can't have mornings like the other day. Em, if this is about Brad eating your food, I'll make sure he doesn't do it again." "It isn't about the food." She pulled out a stool and leaned across the counter. "This is about what he said. About what happened." "Nothing happened." "Don't lie to me, Liv." "Nothing happened," I repeated, fighting to tamp down my annoyance. Brad was freaked out. I've never seen him like that. And the only reason he'd act like that was if something happened to you. So tell me your side of things. I'm all ears. I heard what he said and what you told him. But now I want the truth. I'm not a cop. I'm not IA. And I'm not your father. So tell me what happened. I'm going to bed. I can't talk about an open investigation." "Don't give me that." She blocked the path to my bedroom. "I followed a guy onto the roof. He intended to kill himself. I tried to stop him. In the course of the conversation, he admitted to killing someone else. He wanted me to kill him, and I wouldn't do it. When he realized he was caught, he broke free and jumped." "I'm sorry." "Happy?" The bitterness crept into my voice. She tried to pull me in for a hug, but I stepped back. "He shot at you so you would fire back." "Damn, that's fucked up." "It doesn't matter." But the voice in my head disagreed. Why didn't he kill me? Why didn't he fight back? He knew I was a cop. He already killed once, possibly many more times than that. So why didn't he kill me? Even if he'd given up on his own life, why didn't he take me out before plunging to his death? He never wanted to kill her. "What?" Emma asked. I shook my head. "Nothing." I tried to brush past her, but she jumped in front of me. Emma, move. I'm not in the mood. I'm tired. I'm pissed. And I'm going to bed. Take this the way it's intended. I don't want to see you hurt, so you can't keep doing this. Last time it was a concussion and some bruises. Now someone's shooting at you. Cops die all the time, Liv. It's not safe. You're smart and talented. You can do something else. Anything else. Why are you doing this? Now you sound like my mom. That's when I realized what was going on. Did she call you? Or did you call her? I shoved my way past Emma, but she followed me into my bedroom. You're supposed to be on my side. You're my friend. I am on your side. I am always on your side. That's why I had to say something. This is who I am. This is who I've always been. You've known it since the day you met me. I'm my father's daughter, and my mom will never understand what drove him or what drives me. I can't explain it. I gestured at the window. But shit happens. It's happening right now, and someone has to do something about it. Women are being abducted. They're vanishing. We don't even know what's become of them, but we're trying to figure it out because if we don't, more women will disappear. More people will be killed. More bad shit will happen. I took a shaky breath. You're an ER nurse, for Christ's sake. You know what I'm talking about. You're doing something to help, and so am I. Emma held up her hands. You're right, but I lost 2 GSW victims tonight. One died before they wheeled him in, and the other died on the table. I don't want to see that happen to you. Do you hear me? She sniffed and stormed out of the room. I sighed. Damn it. The bedroom door slammed. Emma, I'm sorry. But I didn't know if she heard me. Deciding to let her cool off, I took a shower and changed into pajama shorts and a t-shirt. Then I grabbed my gun off the counter, tucked it into my nightstand drawer, and went into the kitchen to make some hot cocoa. Emma might be a health food nut, but she wouldn't turn down hot cocoa and what was left of my mother's chocolate chip cookies. I just put the mugs and cookies on a platter when my phone rang. I grabbed it, recognizing the precinct number. Detective DeMarco. I turned off the stove. I thought you'd want to know. We just received confirmation of another abduction, Captain Grayson said. Shit. When? Where? I'll text you the address. It just happened. 911 received a call. There was a witness this time. The Vic matches the profile. Blonde, late teens. Units are rolling on the location. We issued a bolo, and we've started a citywide manhunt. All off-duty personnel are back on duty. Since it's your case, you and Fennel are coordinating the search. Thanks for the heads up. I'm on my way. I ran back into my room, changed clothes, grabbed my gear, and left a note for Emma. If she came out of her room, at least the cookies would soften the blow. 12. He cursed. He should have done it himself. He could have called Clarissa, made up some lie, and lured her to a secluded location. Instead, he asked a two-bit crook to do it for him. Another mistake. He couldn't afford any more mistakes. This had to stop. He'd satisfy his Russian buyer and find some way to sell off the rest of the cargo. He always made it a point to avoid local buyers, but it'd be the fastest and easiest way to get rid of the evidence. With the authorities closing in, it was too hot to move the cargo overseas. Maybe, in a few months, things would die down and he could start over. She knocked, opening the door to his home office. He gave her a sad smile and held up a finger, indicating she give him a moment. I'll take care of it. He hung up the phone. Have you seen the news? She grabbed the remote off the desk and flipped on the TV. Another girl's been taken. I don't know what the world is coming to. How can this keep happening? I don't know, dear. He wrapped his arms around her and kissed her, but his eyes remained glued to the screen. Do they have a suspect? They gave a description of the car a few minutes ago. She pointed to the police sketch. And they know what the girl looks like, but they don't know who she is. Isn't that terrible? Terrible, he agreed, the anger boiling inside of him. The news showed some grainy footage and asked the public to notify the authorities if they spotted the car, the girl, or had any additional information to share. He kissed his wife's forehead. I have to go to work. It's all hands on deck. Everyone at the office is getting anxious. We have a deadline to meet. She squeezed him tighter. Promise me you'll be careful. Whoever's doing this is crazy. The news says he's armed and dangerous. And he could be anywhere. I'll be careful. He kissed the tip of her nose and smiled. I love you. I love you too. She laughed. How did I get so lucky to find such an amazing man when the world is full of psychos? What do we know so far? Mac handed me a photograph. From the dark circles beneath her eyes and the slight tremor in her hands, I could tell she was exhausted. The only thing keeping her going was the energy drink she pounded. Her name's Clarissa Behrens, 19 years old. She lives on the street. No family, few friends. She's in the system. I read the file. Petty crimes. Larceny mostly. Mac reached for her soda can, but I blocked her. Go home, Laura. It's all hands. You know that. I'm fine. You're not fine. I stared at her over the paperwork. How many heart attacks were attributed to energy drinks last year? She held up her palms. She knew the answer. She had an uncanny knack for remembering macabre facts. I'd seen her spout out many impressive answers during trivia night at the bar across from the precinct. Okay, I get it. She backed away from her caffeine fix. Go home. Get some sleep. I pointed at the clock. You've been working for almost 24 hours straight. No one will hold this against you. Fennel came up beside us. Do you want an officer to drive you home? No, they need to continue the search. She looked at the two of us. We'll get this guy. I can feel it. Sister Mary Catherine's on her way, Brad said. She runs the church's homeless outreach program. She's the one who called in the tip and identified Clarissa from the sketch on the news. It's something, but it didn't feel like much. What about the man who took her? I had watched the footage several times since receiving the call. Our night began at the scene. We checked nearby traffic cams. We spoke to a few eyewitnesses, most of whom were also homeless, and canvassed the area. The description of the abductor and the details surrounding the incident were far from helpful. Anything on him or the car? Well, unless Keith Richardson is a zombie, he didn't take Clarissa. No shit. You're tired and bitchy. I glared at my partner. Can you blame me? I crossed my arms over my chest and stared at the board. Clarissa's photo hung beside Jane Doe's. I'm not imagining it. They look alike, right? Blonde, young, thin. He shrugged. Honestly, they look like jailbait. So you wouldn't try to pick either of them up in a bar? Brad spent a few moments thinking about the question. Bar would indicate 21 and over, but as a cop, I know better. And as a man, I don't find either one attractive or sexy. They don't look old enough. They look too young. Like children. It's skeevy. Some men like that. Yeah, psychos and perverts. A lot of those guys are serving hard time. I laughed sarcastically. Ha! And yet there are that many more still on the street. I rolled my neck, listening to my vertebrae crack and pop, but I couldn't quite get rid of the tight pinch. Fennel stepped behind me and dug his thumbs into the muscles at either side of my cervical spine. You know we checked with the registered pedophiles in the area, but that was a bust. They aren't minors. I let my head hang, wincing when he found the knotted muscle just between my shoulder and neck. I know, but Clarissa looks 15. It didn't hurt to check. He waited for me to sigh before removing his hands. Whoever took her didn't go far. We only spotted the car on a few traffic cams before it disappeared. We ran the plates, but it was reported stolen 2 weeks ago. Did uniforms question the owner? Uh-huh. He even let them search his property. I don't think he's involved. Brad moved closer to the board. A large red circle on an area map indicated where all 5 abductions had taken place. He traced the car's route with a pen. The women are being kept somewhere in the vicinity. They have to be. Or we would have seen the car. Do you think he'll kill her? I asked. Keith Richardson killed Jane Doe. We don't know about the others. Lila, Abigail. What did Richardson say to you? I shrugged. He made me do it. He. Do you think he is the same guy who abducted Clarissa? No. Fennel stepped back and rested his hips on the desk. Why not? Assuming Richardson wasn't delusional, then the man who wanted Jane Doe dead wanted her dead for a reason. If killing was his primary goal, pleasure, power, whatever, he wouldn't have asked Richardson to do it. He would have done it himself, and Richardson wouldn't have been involved. So I think whoever forced Richardson to kill Doe probably got this other guy to take Clarissa. And we know Richardson lured Abigail Booker into his car, and she was never seen again. Maybe he did the same to Lila James. Maybe Richardson was collecting women for some unknown bastard. And for some reason, the bastard wasn't pleased with Jane Doe, so he wanted Richardson to correct the mistake. And kill himself because of it? It sounded crazy, but on no sleep and without any clear leads, I found some merit to Brad's theory. Maybe failure wasn't an option. My partner pointed at the grainy photo of a masked man tossing Clarissa into the trunk of a car. We might be looking at Keith Richardson's replacement, or the sick bastard who told Keith to off himself. Or an entirely unrelated case, Captain Grayson said. A nun stood behind him, and he introduced us to Sister Mary Catherine. We took her into the conference room and closed the door, thanking her for calling in the tip and stopping by to help. The church had some weird ideas when it came to protecting people, but we weren't asking a priest to break the sanctity of the confessional. I know Clarissa, the nun said. I tried to encourage her to seek help. There are shelters and outreach programs. She didn't have to live on the streets. She didn't have to do anything alone. I wish she had listened. What else can you tell us about Clarissa? Did she have friends? Family? Anyone? I asked. Clarissa's a runaway. I don't remember where she came from, but when she was 16, she left home. She wanted to be famous. A star. I don't think her home life was particularly nurturing. Abuse? I asked. The nun nodded. She saved, stole, and borrowed to get here, but her reality didn't live up to her dreams. She scrapes together whatever she can and goes to every open call she can find. I tried to convince her to go back to school, but she doesn't listen. She begs on the street and sleeps at hostels and shelters. Most of the time, she goes hungry. A few weeks ago, she showed me her new headshots. No matter what life throws at her, she won't give up. I pray that's enough to get her through this. Headshots for what? Brad asked. She wants to be a singer, but she had hoped to get some advertising work until she's discovered. She heard models live in apartments and meet a lot of important people. For a girl who was lucky to find an empty metal cot most nights, the idea of work providing an apartment, even if it is overcrowded, must sound amazing. Do you recognize this man? I held out a photo of Keith Richardson. Sister Mary Catherine nodded. I do. His name is Keith Boone. Brad scoffed. That son of a bitch. I nudged him with my elbow. Sorry, sister. I don't understand, she said. I took the photo from her hand. This man has been using several fictitious names, each an offshoot of a famous musician. I waved the thought away. But that's not important. Can you describe your interactions with this man? When did you see him last? Did he know Clarissa? The last time I saw Keith was Saturday. He works at the community center. He stops by the church once a week to collect donations. Clothes, blankets, that sort of thing. I find it hard to believe he's involved in a kidnapping. Keith is a good man. He does the Lord's work. I don't think he knows Clarissa. Why do you think he would abduct her? We know he didn't take her. Brad spread out a few other photos. Do you know any of these women? The nun took her time studying each photograph. No, I don't. She put down the photos of Jane Doe, Abigail Booker, and Lila James. Are you positive? I asked. Yes, I do not know them. What about these women? Brad laid out photos of the two missing hookers. Mary Catherine glanced at them and nodded. That's Yasmin and Tanya. I don't know if those are their real names. They're troubled. She looked up at my partner. What is this about? I came here to help find Clarissa. Ma'am, Brad said. These other women were also taken. We believe the same party is responsible. Anything you can tell us might be helpful. She nodded, her focus returning to Keith Richardson. She poked at the glossy print. And you think Keith's involved? We're just covering our bases. What's the church's connection to the community center? Brad asked. We work in concert with one another to help the community. Our neighborhood isn't bad. We don't have much in terms of violent crime or gang violence, but it's a poor area. We try to help our neighbors by making sure they have enough food to eat and a safe place to sleep. Did you ever send Clarissa to the community center? Brad eyed me. He'd been convinced that was our connection, and the moment Sister Mary Catherine confirmed it with a nod, I saw the aha look in his eyes. May I ask why? She cut her hand on a broken glass bottle. It got infected, so I sent her to the free clinic that's run by the community center. The nun looked at both of us. Do you have any idea who took Clarissa, or why he'd do such a thing? The police department had been trying to keep a lid on the recent abductions, but the nun might be able to help us. So I told her what was happening, and we spent the next hour taking notes on every detail and odd occurrence she could remember. At the end, we thanked her for her time, and a uniform escorted her downstairs. I looked over the notes. I'm not sure this helps. Probably not, Fennel admitted. But let's just hope it didn't hurt. He knew we were on a clock. We just didn't know when time would run out. We learned two valuable pieces of intel. One, we need to check the community center. It appears to be the root of all evil. And the other? Clarissa Behrens wanted to be a model. All right, let's split up. We'll cover more ground that way. Modeling agency or community center? I asked. I've been hot for the community center all along. That one's mine. Fine. I'll see if Rogers and Stein is finished remodeling yet. And if they aren't, maybe I'll offer to help. 13. Detective DeMarco. I held out my badge. I need to speak to someone in charge. Do you have an appointment? The guy behind the desk asked. He could have been a model with his boyish good looks, stick-thin physique, and the perfectly applied makeup he wore. He assessed me. Is this about the uniform catalog? Decisions haven't been made yet, hun, but they'll call you. I stared in utter disbelief. Do you see this badge? I practically shoved it in his face. I'm not here about a catalog. I held out the court order. I need to speak to someone in charge, so pick up that phone and get your boss out here. Fine, he huffed. He picked up the phone. Mr. Crenshaw, a police detective is here. Should I contact legal? He gave me a saccharine smile. Sure, I'll see her in. He held the phony smile and stood up. Mr. Crenshaw will see you now. On the way down the hall, I peered into open doorways. The receptionist in the lobby didn't lie about the remodel. Plastic sheets and dust covered a lot of surfaces. A few workers were installing new lights in one of the rooms. Despite the mess, everything was crisp and sharp with modern accents. It looked like any other upscale office, even though this wasn't an upscale neighborhood. This is it. The receptionist stopped just outside the doorway. Thanks. He gave me another fake smile, and I wondered if he was paid extra to be bitchy. He sashayed past and returned to the front desk. I knocked on the open door, probably out of habit, and stepped inside. Good morning. I placed my hand on my hip to emphasize the badge clip to my belt. I'm Detective DeMarco. Detective. Mr. Dale Crenshaw, head of public relations, stood. Is this about the noise? Or permits? I have the paperwork here. He pointed to a stack of files on his desk. No, sir, I just have a few questions about your staff. I wasn't sure how to categorize temps and models, but staff seemed broad enough to cover everything. Please. He gestured to the chair in front of his desk. Is this about the subpoena? We complied with the court order. And we appreciate it. I'm actually here to follow up. We have a few additional questions. We? The police. Right. He leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers before pointing at me. Should I ask for my lawyer? His eyes twinkled. Clearly, it was a joke, but I wasn't in a joking mood. Mr. Crenshaw, I need some information. I'm aware Rogers & Stein hires temps. On occasion? He opened his drawer and pulled out a folder. Here's our contract with a la carte hires. They provide assistants, receptionists, He flipped through the pages. Janitorial staff, and technical support as needed. Tell me about your photographers and recruiters. Recruiters? He chuckled. This isn't the army. We have a few talent scouts, but we don't recruit. We have in-house photographers, but we hire freelancers when necessary, or when we're shooting off-site. Our talent scouts are full-time. We don't source that work out. It would lead to an unfair bias. I examined the gold plaque behind his desk. It was an award for excellence in empowering women. Are you aware of any problems? What kind of problems? Complaints of sexual harassment, stalking, inappropriate workplace attitudes. I know we're living in a new age, Detective DeMarco. Is this about an allegation? Just answer the question. Nothing has been brought to my attention. Rogers & Stein has a zero-tolerance policy. Should an issue like that arise, we'd swiftly rectify it. Tell me about the audition process. He nearly laughed. Are you hoping to moonlight? Sir, I said sternly, please humor me. Depending on the ad campaign, we might issue a casting call if we don't have a person who fits our needs. Other agencies are made aware. They'll send us the information on their clients. We review those files. If we believe someone is a match, we'll call them in. We might take a few shots to send to our client. That's about it. Do you ever have open calls? Sometimes. He saw where the conversation was heading and volunteered the information. We block out a few hours. People come in with their headshots and CVs. A team reviews the paperwork immediately. If we like what we see, we tell them to wait. If we don't, we send them home. The ones who are asked to wait are photographed and evaluated. Then we take it from there. What happens to the personal information you collect? It gets destroyed. Rogers and Stein takes privacy rights very seriously. Tired of answering questions, Crenshaw asked, "What is this about?" Rogers and Stein was mentioned during the course of an investigation. I just have to dot the I's and cross the T's. Reaching into my inner jacket pocket, I removed a few photographs. "Do you recognize any of these people?" While he examined the photographs, I watched him. He studied the photos of Abigail Booker and Keith Richardson without batting an eye. "I don't believe so." "Have you had any open calls for young blonde women recently?" "I'm not in charge of that. Give me a minute, I'll find out." He left his office and I glanced back at the door. Conducting a search without a warrant was illegal, but anything in plain sight was fair game. The documents on his desk were work-related, containing details on severance packages, performance reviews, and employee grievances. I scanned the grievances, but they were mostly missed pay or incorrect hours. Like Crenshaw said, no one had filed a sexual harassment complaint or anything worse. And if they did, he didn't keep it on his desk. The walls were covered in images from Rogers and Stein's most successful modeling campaigns. Their models had been used to advertise some high-end timepieces, sunglasses, and fashion. Turning, I noticed the label on the jacket hanging behind the door. Hearing footsteps approaching, I moved to the window and stared outside. "It's terrible, isn't it?" "What?" I asked, spinning. "The view. It's hideous." He held out a sheet of paper. "That's the information we sent to the agencies. According to HR, they also posted the call on our website." I read the date. 2 weeks ago, Rogers and Stein had been swarming with perky young blondes. How much do these gigs pay? Do the models get room and board? It varies. The biggest perk is getting to keep the samples left behind. Suits, handbags, sunglasses. Does that happen every time? Clarissa might have wanted the gig just upon the high-end items. It depends on the advertiser. We have a closet in back where we keep the gear. It's a nice reward for a job well done. And the rumored model apartments? Are those just rumors? No, but not every model stays in one of our apartments. Those are usually reserved for runway, specific locales, fashion week, special circumstances. I see. Detective, I have work to do. Is there anything else? Just one more thing. Do you know if these women showed up for that audition? I handed him photographs of Jane Doe and Clarissa Behrens. He looked at the women, a slight furrow to his brow. Do you know their names? He held out the photo of Clarissa. She looks familiar, like I just saw her. Were you at the casting call? No. We don't have an ID on that one. I pointed to Jane Doe. But the other is Clarissa Behrens. Huh. He retook his seat and typed her name into an internet search. She was abducted last night. The news has been running her name and picture all morning. That's why you're here. But you requested off files before. He looked at the other photo. Ms. Behrens wasn't the first, was she? No. Where were you when Rogers and Stein held the casting call? I was at a friend's wedding. He must have seen the suspicious look on my face. I'll get you names. Thanks. He wrote down a dozen names and corresponding phone numbers and handed me the sheet of paper. Ms. Behrens doesn't work for us. We don't have her information on file. I don't know if she was here that day or not. I'm sorry I can't be more helpful. I placed my card on his desk. In case you think of something, don't hesitate. I won't. Before leaving, I spoke to several other Rogers and Stein employees, but no one recognized any of the women or Keith Richardson. Perhaps they were lying, but I didn't have any hard proof any of the victims stepped foot inside the office. Everything was hearsay and speculation. However, I didn't believe a nun would lie. Clarissa wanted to be a model. I just didn't know if that meant she went to an open call at Rogers and Stein, or she tried her luck someplace else. On my way back to the station, I couldn't help but think of everything and nothing. I sent Mac home because she was exhausted, but Fennel and I had been at this almost as long. Nothing was making sense, but that might have been because I couldn't think straight. After stopping at a juice bar and picking up 2 green smoothies, I returned to work. Hopefully, Brad was having some better luck. "DeMarco," the desk sergeant said. "FBI agent Peters is here to see you. I put him in one of the empty interrogation rooms. Thought you might like some privacy." "Are you getting a kick out of that?" "Whatever do you mean?" he asked innocently. "Play nice," I warned. "We need Peters's help." I dropped the smoothies off and opened the door to interrogation. Peters stood in the corner, his hands in his pockets. He nodded at a file on the table. "Thought I should drop that off. I'm sorry, Detective. I wish I had better news." I picked up the file and rested my hips on the table. The DNA they recovered from the charred bones matched the DNA the ME's office had on record for Jane Doe and Keith Richardson. "How did this happen?" I asked. Peters sighed. "I wish I knew. We've gone over everything. The FBI offices are supposed to be secure, especially the motor pool and garage. The only people with access are government agents." "Someone in your office is dirty. That's what I'm hearing." "We checked the records. Your team checked our records. The 2 imposters gained access to the garage using an ID. It was fake. Andrew Savage. That's the name on the badge they used, but we don't have any agents named Andrew Savage." "Shouldn't someone have checked before giving him the keys to a van?" "I don't know. When you access the evidence locker, do they run your badge number and ID to make sure you're who you claim to be?" "Point taken." Peters's phone rang, and he glanced at the display before hitting ignore. "I just thought you'd like to know. According to the police techs I spoke to, these men, Andrew Savage and his partner, or whatever aliases they are using now, used the same tactics to get into the ME's office and cart off the bodies. That's a lot of extra work to go through just to destroy evidence. They wouldn't have needed an FBI van or FBI credentials to steal some bodies. And impersonating a federal agent is a serious crime to add to their growing list of felonies. So why did they go to that much trouble?" "That's a good question." Unfortunately, I didn't have an answer. Just something to think about. His phone rang again. "Excuse me." He hit answer. "Hi, honey. Is everything okay?" While he spoke on the phone, I read the reports and studied the stills taken from the security footage. The imposters avoided the cameras. They were careful. They knew the layout of the federal building. They must have been inside at some prior point to stealing the van. I glanced at Peters, wondering if the imposters were actual FBI agents pretending to be different FBI agents. "I will. Love you too." He hung up. "Sorry about that. My wife worries." "Makes sense." I flipped to the last 2 pages. According to this, the imposters split up at the body dump. One stayed behind to destroy the remains, while the other returned the van. "Yes, the thin one dropped off the van and walked out the side exit." He kept his head down. "We have a team hoping to pull a reflection off a window or shiny surface, but so far we've had no luck." "What about the second one? How did he elude us?" "Nearby security cameras caught a man matching his description getting into a car. It's the same car used in Clarissa Barron's abduction, but it's not the same guy who abducted her. The FBI imposter has a heavier build than the man who snatched Clarissa, but I'm sure the same people are responsible for the stolen bodies and the kidnapping. Director Kendall has made it clear we are at your disposal. Let me know what we can do to help." "We need to find the car." Peters nodded. "We're on it." 14. Peters raised some very good questions. Why would anyone go to the trouble of stealing an FBI van just to take 2 bodies from the morgue? And that's when I realized the imposters feared their credentials wouldn't hold up under scrutiny. The cheap suits and sunglasses would only go so far, and unlike the FBI motor pool, which expected to see FBI agents come and go, the ME's office would have wanted the proper paperwork before handing over evidence. And the imposters couldn't provide it. They didn't have valid case numbers, and the ME's office would have discovered it the moment they called for verification. The van was meant to sell their cover. That had to be the only reason they'd go to that much trouble. They must have believed they wouldn't get caught. Maybe they even thought the van would cover their tracks entirely by convincing the PD that the FBI had taken over the case. After all, under any other circumstances, identifying a killer and finding evidence of his kill was enough to close a case and end the investigation. And with the ME's backlog, no one would have missed the bodies. We shouldn't have been the wiser. What's this? Brad jiggled the cup on his desk. Breakfast. Fennel took a sip and smacked his lips. Pineapple, banana, and something else. Mango. Thanks, Liv. You're the best. I take back all the terrible things I said about you. I narrowed my eyes at him. So, how'd it go? I had to call for a court order. We won't know more until it gets served. He took another sip from the cup and tapped on his desk. The ink should be drying as we speak. You found something? I spoke to David Hennon again. He doesn't just run the AA meetings. He manages the community center's various programs. He wasn't pleased about our deception. He can get over it. Anyway, he identified Keith Richardson as Tobias Keith. Keith volunteered and worked at the information desk. His duties included deliveries and pickups, answering questions, and directing walk-ins wherever they needed to go. That sounds risky since the church knew him as Keith Boone. I guess Sister Mary Catherine and David Hennon don't travel in the same circles. Did Keith have access to private information? He might have. He collected paperwork for the free clinic since it's paid for by the community center. It's in a separate building, an annex as they call it, but it's only 2 doors over. And according to David, Keith ran whatever errands anyone needed. He also coached some of the rec center's youth leagues, basketball, volleyball, and... Brad squinted, trying to recall the other one. I want to say badminton. But to play on a team, forms had to be filled out. Next of kin, permission slips, that sort of thing. For a killer, Keith was a real nice guy, I said sarcastically. Oh yeah, he was a peach. Fennel slurped down more of his smoothie. The youth leagues covered anyone 21 and younger, so maybe Abigail or Lila participated at some point. I still think the community center is key to figuring out why these women were targeted. That doesn't explain the court order for the medical records. I'm getting to that. Fennel put down his cup. David said Yasmin, Tanya, and several other working girls used the clinic when necessary. We know Lila hung posters for the community theater on the board, and the sister told us she sent Clarissa to get her hand examined. The only 2 we haven't placed at the community center are Jane Doe and Abigail Booker. But it looks promising. I think we found this predator's hunting grounds. I held up my cup. Cheers. Brad bumped his cup with mine. We need coffee. Or sleep, I thought. But neither of us would voice it with Clarissa missing. She'd been taken 8 hours ago. We need to find the car. We need to find the women. The longer she's gone, the harder it will be to track her. I know, and she might be able to lead us to the others. I updated Brad on the intel Agent Peters gave us. Every available police officer and FBI agent is looking for the car and Clarissa. The car used in Clarissa's abduction was originally located at the dump site. That was Hardy's means of escape. And we know it was reported stolen 2 weeks prior to that. Hardy, he's the fat one, right? Hardy must have stolen it and stashed it there for when he needed it. That means they've been planning this a long time. I didn't like the thoughts going through my mind. I know officers have already canvassed the area, but I can't stay here. I have to do something. Go, Fennel said. I'll wait for the records. Just be careful, Liv. But I didn't go. Instead, I froze in front of the board. The red circle and X's on the area map caught my eye. Actually, let's rework this. I took the map down. Everything we need is here. We're just not seeing it. I didn't know if that was true, but I didn't know where else to look. I needed the answers to be here. Clarissa and the other women needed them to be here. I'll pull traffic cam footage. Fennel entered a few commands into the computer. The car used in Clarissa's abduction had been parked behind the warehouse. Hardy stayed behind to make sure the bodies burned. After he was done, he exited through the back, peeled a tarp off the car, and drove away. I watched the footage again. I hadn't seen it before because we didn't know where to look, but that changed thanks to Agent Peters. I watched the bastard pull open the door and hotwire the car. The starter's busted, Fennel noted. Yeah, but that didn't stop him from eventually getting it to go. The car drove off the screen. Follow that car. Yeah, I'm trying. Fennel worked the computer, bringing up dozens of little squares with relevant traffic cam footage. We watched the car leave the warehouse district, take some side streets, double back, turn, and vanish. Hang on. He paused the footage and marked the route on the map. Several hours later, we pick up the car again here. He pointed to a spot fairly close. The driver's different. See? He pointed to an image of a much thinner man. He left the engine running, got out of the car, jogged up beside Clarissa, and nabbed her off the street. He must have been following her. She wasn't stationary. Why don't we have any other footage of the car? Where are our blind spots? Brad brought up a map marked with traffic cam locations and reached for a pen. Hardy must have disappeared somewhere in here. And this other guy picked up the car and stayed off our radar. I looked at the 4 square blocks and checked the camera locations. What about here and here? No cameras. I grabbed Jane Doe's file off my desk. She was found here. No area footage showing how she got there. That's reasonably close. I'd say it's in the same vicinity. It's like a big black hole in the middle of our investigation. I didn't like blind spots. Bad things happened in those areas. Women were killed. Accomplices vanished. Several office buildings were on the fringe of the blackout zone, including the building which housed Rogers and Stein. At the far right corner of the blackout zone was the community center, and on the other end was the monthly stay condos. Somewhere in here are our body snatchers and the missing women. Fennel whistled. You know patrols have been all over this place. No one's seen or heard anything. We haven't even spotted the car, and according to the traffic cams, it drove back into the blind spot and never reappeared. Where do you think they are? Brad clicked a few more keys. The city has hundreds of cameras, but a lot of places aren't covered. It's conceivable they found a way out. With the entire city on alert? I doubt it. They'd have to dump the car and get a new one. But where did they hide the first one? While Fennel mapped out every street and alleyway that could be used to aid in their escape, I checked for garages and storage sites. Anything big enough to stash a car. Kincaid knows how to make cars disappear. Brad looked up, concern in his eyes. Axel Kincaid? Yeah. It's your dime, Liv. Fennel went back to the computer, glancing up surreptitiously to see if I was going to make the call. It hadn't been that long since I infiltrated Kincaid's club, in the hopes of building a case against the car thief turned legitimate businessman. We didn't exactly part on the best of terms. Although, for a suspected criminal, Axel was far more cordial than most men I arrested. Still, asking for his help would be like throwing lit matches on a kerosene tank. Eventually, it would blow up in my face. The phone rang, and Fennel grabbed it. He listened for several moments. How narrow? He put it on speaker. Medical privacy rights are highly guarded. The judge doesn't see any reason why you'd need to access them. ADA Winters said. We don't. I just need to know if the missing women went to the clinic or used any other services provided by the community center. That I can do. The clinic will be able to tell you yes or no, but that's the end of it. Fine by me. Thanks. Brad picked up the receiver and put it down. I'll run with this. Do you want to continue the search for the car? Might as well. I stifled a yawn. Good luck. 15. It must have been exhaustion or desperation. Standing outside of Spark went against my better judgment. In the middle of the day, the nightclub didn't look like much, but it was after 3. Axel Kincaid should be inside, prepping for the night to come. The front door was locked, and I pressed the intercom button. A moment later, a familiar voice asked what I wanted. Hey Rick, it's Liv. Is Mr. Kincaid in? I'll check. Rick didn't have to check. Kincaid was there. If he wasn't, Rick wouldn't be working the front door. What Rick had to check was whether Axel was willing to speak to me. I didn't hold my breath. When this turned out to be a pointless endeavor, I planned to head home and sleep for a few hours. Captain Grayson ordered me to do so and vowed to send Fennel home just as soon as he got back to the station. The captain didn't expect us to continue functioning when we were coming up on the 36-hour mark. Clarissa was gone, and at this point, 2 more detectives wouldn't make a huge difference in the ongoing search efforts. The door opened, and Kincaid stood in front of me in a wrinkled white dress shirt and suit pants. No tie, no jacket. His hair was mussed, and I wondered if he just left a woman upstairs in his loft. Detective. His tone matched the ice blue of his eyes. I knew we'd cross paths again. What crime are you hoping to pin on me this time? None. I regretted knocking almost as much as the next words out of my mouth. I need your help. I'm intrigued. He leaned against the door jamb, refusing to invite me inside. I need to know how to make a car vanish. He snickered. I wouldn't know. Have you seen the news? A woman was taken. They've been playing the security footage on a loop. It aired at noon. I wasn't awake. Well, it was on at 6 and throughout the night, ever since it happened. Please, Axel. I just need to know where to look. You searched traffic cam footage? I nodded. But you lost sight of it? Yeah. Garages, parking and otherwise. Warehouses, storage rentals, parking lots with obstructed views, beneath overpasses. We checked them all. With the right team and equipment, the plates could be changed and the car repainted in less than 2 minutes. Are you sure it isn't hiding in plain sight? Not that we've seen. He reached for the door. I haven't heard anything, Detective. I'll let you know if I do. It's not high-end. I doubt you'd hear about it. You'd be surprised. For the briefest moment, concern flickered across his face. You look like shit. Get some rest. And he shut the door. Thanks a lot. I trudged back to my car. Kincaid didn't tell me anything I didn't already know. On my drive home, I wondered why I even bothered. You know why, I said aloud as I went up the steps. You have to find her. You have to find them. So pull it together, DeMarco. Finished with my pep talk, I unlocked the door. The cookies remained on the counter, and the pot was still on the stove. Obviously, Emma was still mad. I tossed the water in the sink, left the pot in the drain, and collapsed on the bed. For a few short hours, there was nothingness. But my subconscious mind didn't allow the reprieve for long. While I slept, it gnawed on everything we'd learned and Kincaid's words. Blinking open my eyes, I rolled over and glanced at the clock. It was just after 7. I hadn't even changed out of my clothes. My badge was still hooked on my belt. At least I had the foresight to remove my firearm and shoes. Hiding in plain sight, I mumbled. Getting up, I brushed my teeth, ran a comb through my hair, and checked for messages. Fennel didn't call, and neither did the station, which meant we hadn't found anything. Damn it. Taking a seat at the kitchen counter, I chomped on a stale cookie and stared out the window. We knew the make and model of the car. Those things couldn't be changed, but everything else could. I packed up the rest of the cookies and grabbed my keys. We were missing something. Clarissa had been taken 19 hours ago. Based on statistics, the first 24 were crucial. We had 5 hours to find her before our chances substantially diminished. And then she'd just be another photo hanging on the board beside the others. I couldn't let that happen. I just didn't know how to stop it. I'd been driving around for almost 2 hours when Fennel called. He couldn't sleep either. We had to find Clarissa. We agreed to meet up, and I parked my car on the top level of the garage. Ever since I left the apartment, I'd been checking every possible location Kincaid mentioned. Every other law enforcement officer had already done it. But maybe Axel was right. Maybe they repainted the car and ditched the plates. Hell, they might have re-etched the VIN. The police had gone door to door to every chop shop and garage in search of the vehicle used in the abduction, but it was nowhere to be found. Every officer and detective I knew had gone to their CIs, hoping to get some tidbit of information, but those results had been just as fruitless. That left 2 possibilities. It was hidden on private property, or it was here, somewhere. I had physically checked the first 4 levels of the garage by the time Brad arrived. The unmarked cruiser stopped beside me, and he rolled down the window. "Hey, Liv. Where did you park?" "Top level." "Okay. I'll be down in a sec." He drove past while I finished checking the row of vehicles and moved around the corner to the next set. The elevator dinged, and my partner stepped out. He rubbed at the scruff on his jaw. "Didn't Grayson tell you to take the rest of the night?" I couldn't sleep. Me neither. While we continued to search the rows of vehicles, Fennel updated me on his findings. Yasmin, Tanya, and Clarissa had visited the free clinic in the last 6 weeks. Based on our timeline, Yasmin's visit occurred only a day or 2 before her disappearance. And Lila volunteered at the community center to help with an acting class they offered the previous month. What about Abigail and Jane Doe? I showed Jane Doe's photo around, but no one's talking. Every worker and volunteer directed me back to David. I'm not sure if they're afraid of him or they respect him, but he gives me bad vibes. Even in the AA meeting? Especially in the AA meeting. Didn't he seem fake to you? Like he was trying too hard, or... Brad shook his head, hoping to knock the thought loose. He wanted to lord his sobriety over them or something. I don't know. I guess. I tried to think back, but I'd been more focused on remembering faces and learning names than listening to what David had to say. I don't know, but I don't trust him. I think he knows more than he's letting on. Units are sitting on the community center, and a secondary team has orders to shadow David. So we'll see what happens. The community center doesn't have any record of Abigail Booker. We still don't know where she crossed paths with Keith. But we know she did. Not that it even matters anymore. Don't say that. I bumped against his shoulder. Have we looked into Nikki? Could she be involved? She doesn't have a record, but it's hard to clear her under the circumstances. Let's put a surveillance team on her too, just in case. Yeah, okay. Brad made the request since he had a better relationship with dispatch, and I finished my examination of the parked cars. Are you going to tell me what you're hoping to find? I went to see Axel Kincaid. Since he's a car thief, he should know how to hide a car. He suggested the car might have been repainted and the plates exchanged. So I'm checking every car that matches the make and model. I sighed. I don't know what else to do. We left the garage and continued our search. Eventually, it led to the monthly stay condos. A blue four-door sat in the middle of a row of cars. It was the same make and model as the one used in Clarissa's abduction. I peered into the windows, but I couldn't see anything inside. Brad checked the VIN in the windshield, but it didn't match the one reported stolen. That's the easiest one to change, I said. VINs were listed in 3 separate locations on a car: the dash, the inside of the door, and the rear of the frame. Taking off his jacket, Brad spread it out on the dirt and lay on top of it. With his flashlight in his hand, he checked the frame. It's corroded. I can't make it out. Do you think that was intentional? I can't tell. Brad stood, knocked the dirt off his jacket, and put it back on. Motels register guest vehicles, right? Why don't we run the plate against the VIN and go inside and get the owner's name and see if it matches? That'd be easiest. Okay. I surveyed the area. Based on the interior lights, it appeared more than half the rooms were currently occupied. I wondered if the women I encountered last time were still staying here. I had no reason to knock, but I was starting to get a bad feeling. I reached for my phone but didn't move from the spot. Are you coming, Liv? In a minute. I just want to check on something out here first. Do you need backup? No, it might be best if we maintain some distance. What are you planning? I'm not sure yet. Let me know when you figure it out, preferably before you do something asinine. I laughed. Me? He gave me an all-too-familiar look. I'll think about it. Without waiting for Brad's sarcastic reply, I headed in the direction of the first-floor vending machines. The motel had a collection of condos. The main building had interior corridors, but the first-floor condos that faced the parking lot had exterior access. I passed the vending machine and lingered outside the door. No light came from within, and I didn't hear any sounds. Perhaps the women were out for the evening, or they checked out of the motel. The crying was the only thing that made me suspicious, but women crying wasn't a rare occurrence. The world was hard. People cried. Life went on. My gaze went back to the car, and I dialed the station and waited for an answer to the car owner's identity. The VIN matched the plate, which was registered to a Nathan Lentz. Anything else, Detective? Probably not, but if that changes, I'll get back to you. More than likely, the guest registry would have a listing for Nathan Lentz, and this would turn into yet another dead end. As I approached the lobby, I checked the time. We had less than 2 hours to find Clarissa, and the last bit of hope fizzled out of me. We didn't know why women were being taken, but our best guess was human trafficking. Without additional bodies turning up, it made the most sense. The victims weren't likely to be missed, but someone missed Abigail, and enough people realized Lila was gone to take notice. The real kicker was Clarissa Behrens' abduction. Now we were onto them. If this was a human trafficking ring, they'd scatter. And I didn't think we had enough to find them. Our only lead jumped off the roof and had his remains stolen. Once more, I found myself dwelling on all the ways this case had gone awry. Keith Richardson's real identity would cinch the case. I didn't know how or why, but I knew it would. We needed a miracle. 16. Did he view the merchandise? He asked. The police were desperately searching for Clarissa Behrens. They wouldn't leave any rock or stone unturned. He had to unload her as soon as possible. The Russian said he wanted the blonde. Hopefully he accepted delivery. That way Clarissa would no longer be his problem. He wasn't interested. There's too much heat on the girl. He didn't want to take the risk. Did he take any of the others? 3. Shit. He cursed. Only 3. What do you want me to do with the rest, boss? Move them to the auction site. They've seen too much. They know too much. We need to get rid of them one way or the other. If the police get their hands on them, we're fucked. And the ones in the stable? He remained in his car and watched the scene unfold from his windshield. I'll speak to Ivan. Ingrid was clever and escaped, but the rest don't seem to realize the reality of their situation. I'd like to keep it that way. Since they don't know their real purpose, we should keep up the charade for now. Releasing them all at once will make the girls suspicious. So we'll keep them a while longer and slowly trickle their release. They'll just think they weren't good enough to be selected. They'll never know how lucky they were. What do you want me to do with Clarissa? Is she still at the house? Yes. He hunkered down farther in his seat and watched the 2 police detectives scout the motel parking lot. They shouldn't be here. They shouldn't be this close. Keith, you bastard, he thought. If they discovered his stable, he'd have to kill them all. It would be a waste of money, time, and human life. Move Clarissa first, and use a different car. The police are looking for that vehicle. Leave it at the house. I'll send a team to scrap it. How's security? Did the Russian withdraw his men? No. Dmitri and Yuri are keeping watch on the house. Okay. Tell them to expect my team. In the meantime, move those girls to the auction site. And do it one at a time. Make sure you aren't tailed. The police are everywhere. Yes, sir. Nathan Lentz, Brad said. That's the same name on the vehicle registration. I rubbed my face. We're not going to find her in time. Fennel led the way back to the cars. Let's go back to the station and analyze the intel. Yeah, okay. Since we didn't find the car or the woman, the hopelessness and depression seeped into my soul. Everything we did was an utter waste. Fennel leafed through the intel we gathered, checked statements, and cross-referenced details to see if anyone lied, or if the overlap might lead us in the right direction. I focused my efforts on finding out who could orchestrate this. We knew Keith must have identified the targets. Since he was the last person seen with Abigail, he probably abducted her, possibly Lila too, and he killed Jane Doe. But some other man was pulling the strings, and he had an entire team working for him. I stared at the sketches of the 2 FBI impersonators. They gained access to the FBI garage, the ME's office, and who knows what else. And a third man abducted Clarissa Behrens off the street. That made 5 suspects involved in these abductions. The car used in the abduction remained MIA, and the FBI van had been scrubbed clean. Maybe the techs found something at the ME's office. Leaving my desk, I went to check on the progress they made. Even though I sent Mac home several hours earlier, she left the computer running and her notes out. Another member of Cyber Division picked up the slack. It didn't take long to locate the report. The ME's internal cameras had been remotely hacked. That's how the men knew when it was safe to enter. They probably hadn't counted on Dr. Emerson interrupting their getaway, but it didn't take much to convince the doc to let them leave. Is anyone really that gullible? I asked, returning to my desk. The bodies went missing. The imposters were aware of the security measures and knew how to circumvent them. It could be an inside job. You think Doc Emerson's involved? Brad considered the possibility. He would know what types of crimes and victims get the least amount of attention. But what's his endgame? Murder? Human trafficking? We've been to his house. It's just him, his wife, and their 2 cats. I'm guessing what we see is what we get. It can't hurt to check. Since he was a government employee, accessing Emerson's records wasn't too difficult. Emerson was sitting on a small fortune. He had no reason to moonlight, and I didn't see any strange fluctuation in his financials. His wife was a biology professor at the same university Lila James attended, but that was the only connection I could find between the ME and our missing women. As far as I could tell, he didn't have much incentive to kidnap young women, unless he was a sadistic pervert, which was entirely possible. Disgusted, I turned back to the board. Since I couldn't locate Clarissa, I had to identify the man responsible. The failure continued to eat away at me. We had dozens of units searching the city for the car and the woman. How could we still be in the dark? My phone rang and I grabbed it. The car's on Tremont. Hurry. Who is this? I asked, but the caller hung up. I need to know who just phoned my desk. I looked around the room. A couple of uniforms stared at me. Get on it, now. What's up? Fennel asked. The car's on Tremont. Let's move. I didn't know who the caller was, but I knew the tip was legit. We raced to the location. No sirens, no lights. We didn't want to scare off the kidnapper. 2 backup units lingered nearby, ready to jump in or set up a perimeter. There! I pointed, and Brad parked at an angle behind the sedan. The plates matched the stolen vehicle. I threw open the door and aimed at the car. Brad and I circled from opposite sides. I peered in the rear window, then the front. Clear. With gloved hands, Fennel opened the driver's door and hit the trunk release. DeMarco? She's not here. I holstered my weapon. Fuck. The car had been left in a private driveway, partially concealed by a privacy fence and some trash cans. I didn't want to think about how many units drove past and never noticed it. Fennel moved to the front of the car and placed his hand on the hood. It's warm. That got my attention, and I reached for my gun. Brad used hand signals, and we split up to scout the property. For the hood to be warm, the car couldn't have been here that long. The tipster must have followed it here, or the kidnapper called to gloat. Either way, I didn't care. I just hoped Clarissa was close. I moved to the front door while Brad went around back. The door was locked, and I checked the windows, but there was no way to see inside. Liv, Fennel whispered, gesturing for me to join him. I crept away from the door and followed my partner around the side of the house. Leaving the front door unguarded wasn't wise, but it was just the 2 of us for now. Upstairs. He pointed to a window. I looked up at the 2nd floor. The blinds gently swayed back and forth, but I didn't see anyone. With the way the windows were covered, we couldn't get eyes inside. I kept watch on the house while he checked the tool shed at the end of the property. The door opened, but no one was inside. Clear, he whispered, returning to our position. Fennel and I ran at a crouch, keeping low and moving from cover to cover. A branch snagged my hair, so I tucked my ponytail into the back of my collar as I maneuvered through the bushes. At the back door, Brad stopped, listening for sounds coming from inside. He tried the knob, but the place was locked up tight. Still, for the engine to be warm, someone had to be here. I don't hear anything. He moved to a window and peered in. Shaking his head, he checked the other window before returning to the back door. Maybe he ditched the car and took off in another vehicle. We should wait for backup. Go cover the front. But before I could move an inch, a muffled scream came from inside the house. I reached for the radio, advising the incoming units we were entering the house from the rear, and they needed to secure the front. They'd be here in a minute, but the woman screaming might not have that long. Fennel took a step back and kicked in the door. He went in high and to the right. I followed low and to the left. The rear door opened into a narrow hallway. The first room we came to was the laundry room. It was empty. Fennel moved deeper into the house. At the end of the hallway, he pressed his back against the wall and peered around the corner. When he didn't spot anyone, he spun into the living room, letting the barrel of his Glock lead the way. I branched out in the opposite direction. Another scream sounded, but I couldn't determine where it came from. I burst into the bedroom, announcing myself as I entered. But the room was empty. Where was she? A creak from above halted us in our tracks. "Stairs," Fennel called, moving through the main room and heading for the staircase. "Right behind you." I finished my check of the bedroom and followed him to the stairs. We had no idea how many hostiles were inside, but we knew someone was upstairs. The front door slammed inward, and Fennel and I flew apart like shrapnel, seeking cover. 3 uniformed officers entered the house, while the third stowed the ram. I held up my badge and informed them of the situation. A second staircase leading down caught my eye. She could be in the basement. The 6 of us split up. 2 uniforms took the staircase down. The other police officer and his partner guarded the main level, ensuring no one escaped through the front or back. I tapped Brad on the shoulder, and he led the way up the steps. The first shot was so loud everything that followed was almost muted. 3 more shots went off in rapid succession. One of them tore into the wall above my head, and I hit the ground. I aimed at the source of the barrage, but from this angle I couldn't see anyone. The bastard had to be hiding inside the room at the top of the steps. "Police, drop your weapon," Fennel announced. Gunfire reverberated throughout the house, and the sounds of a scuffle grew louder. We weren't the only ones under fire. In response, more bullets flew our way. We needed to get off the stairs. Go up or retreat. Those were our 2 options. A bullet from below splintered the railing, and I jumped back. Down was no longer viable. "Are you hit?" Fennel asked. "No, I'm good." I keyed my radio. "Shots fired at police. All available units, please respond." "Cover me." Fennel dashed up the remaining steps. When he made it to the top, he ducked against the wall. He signaled to me, and I ran up the stairs, keeping my head down and my gun aimed. I darted across the open doorway, and another 2 shots narrowly missed me. "Police!" I bellowed. "We have you surrounded. Toss out your weapons and come out with your hands up." In response, the door frame splintered from a shotgun blast, and I tucked myself into the corner. So much for playing nice. "Where's the rest of our backup?" Fennel muttered, seeing them pinned down below us. I gestured for Brad to wait, and I reached for one of the glass sconces that dotted the hallway. I lifted it off the light bulb and forced my breathing to slow. "Ready?" Fennel nodded, and I tossed the glass fixture into the room. The shooter spun and fired. My partner darted into the room and tackled the man. "Watch out!" The warning came from below. I didn't even have time to process what it meant before a spray of bullets peppered the wall. I dove into the corner and dropped to my belly. The gunfire abated, but a fight broke out downstairs. Glass shattered, and the walls shook as screams and growls replaced the deafening weapons' discharge. "Offender down," the officer below announced. Pushing to my feet, I burst into the bedroom after my partner. Fennel had wrestled the shotgun away from the shooter, but the man had my partner in a headlock. "Let him go," I snarled. The abrupt command caused the attacker to have a momentary lapse, and Fennel slammed him backward into a wall. The offender's grip loosened, and Brad elbowed him in the jaw, turning and swinging with a right hook, followed closely by a left jab. The guy crumpled to the ground, and Fennel reached for his cuffs. The wall next to me was riddled with bullet holes, but they weren't from a shotgun. I couldn't remember how many shots I heard, but there had to be another weapon, possibly another shooter. "Are you okay?" I asked. Fennel nodded and cuffed the prick. "Downstairs?" "I don't know. We need to wrap this up and get down there." While Fennel frisked the suspect, I inched forward to check the rest of the room. We were inside the master bedroom. I eyed the 3 closed doors. With my gun in hand, I carefully threw open the first one. It was a walk-in closet. I peered inside, but it was clear. I was just reaching for the next door handle when the door flew open with enough force to knock the gun from my hands. A large, burly man launched himself at me. The guy looked like a steroid-addled linebacker due to his sheer bulk and height. I dove for my gun, but it was too late. He was already on top of me. He batted the gun away before I could reach it, wrapped his hands around my neck, and lifted me off the ground. I struggled and kicked, but his grip only tightened. I tried to wrap my legs around him, needing the leverage, but he kept me at arm's length. "Fennel!" I sputtered. I kicked again, hoping to loosen the offender's grip by breaking his balls. Unfortunately, the guy turned to the side, making my kick ineffectual. My foot glanced off his thigh, and he continued to hold firm. I couldn't breathe. My head started to swim. "Son of a bitch!" I kicked him again and desperately tried to pry his fingers off my neck. "Let her go," Fennel warned. "I said, let her go." I couldn't turn around to see my partner, which meant he didn't have a shot, and he wouldn't risk taking one. The offender intended to use me as a human shield. The offender said something in a language I didn't understand and jerked his chin at the door. "That's not happening, pal," Brad replied. The bastard squeezed my throat harder, and I clawed at his eyes. Think, Liv. Remembering the pepper spray on my keychain, I reached into my pocket at the same moment Brad rushed him. The linebacker held me with one hand and knocked Fennel into the dresser with the other. This guy was unbelievable, but the distraction provided the perfect opportunity. I grabbed the pepper spray and released it into the offender's face. He dropped to his knees, dragging me to the ground with him. But he lost his hold around my neck, and I shoved him onto his stomach. "Stay down," Fennel ordered, covering the offender with his gun. "You okay, Liv?" "Peachy." I coughed and inched away, not wanting to be near the burning aerosol. "You cuff him." Grabbing my gun off the floor, I pointed it at the downed offender, watching as tears streamed down his face. Fennel took my cuffs and slapped them on the guy. More shots sounded just outside the bedroom door. "How many more are out there?" The 2 offenders glared at us. The one who attacked Brad spit on my partner's shoe, and for a moment, I thought Brad might knock some manners into him. "Where are the women?" I asked. The one I pepper sprayed wiped his face on his shoulder and stared up at me. He spoke again in a foreign language. Even though I didn't understand what he was saying, I got the gist. "You fucking asshole!" I retorted. He laughed and looked defiantly at me. "We don't have time for this," Brad insisted. I tugged open the 3rd door, unsure what I'd find. It opened into an empty bathroom. The window was too small for either man to fit through, and after a quick sweep, I didn't see any obvious weapons or other means of escape. "We can secure them in here." "It'll have to do." Fennel cuffed the two men together around a pipe to keep them from escaping. We barricaded the door with a bookcase, just to be certain they couldn't get away or rejoin the fight. It probably wouldn't hold them permanently, but it would do the job until the situation was resolved and more units arrived. By now, the gunfire had stopped. Afraid of what this might mean, I ran from the room and down the steps with Fennel at my heels. "Upstairs is clear," I announced to the cop slumped near the staircase. He didn't look so good. "Are you hit?" "I'm fine. He got my vest." Brad knelt beside him. "How many? Where are they? Where'd they come from?" "Outside. They got the drop on us. There were 4 of them." The officer moved to stand and winced. "Tony took down 2. The others went down there." "You're okay. Stay put." Brad looked around while I requested an ETA. Before dispatch could provide an answer, 2 additional patrol cars arrived, sirens blaring and lights flashing. Fennel looked up at the incoming officers. "He's been hit. I don't know where his partner is. Sweep this floor and be prepared for anything." We locked 2 in the bathroom upstairs. By the time Fennel finished giving instructions, I was already down the steps. The staircase abruptly ended in front of a steel door. The lock had been broken off, and the door was slightly ajar. Another scream sounded, and I shouldered my way inside. 17. Bullets flew in my direction, and I dove to the side. The officer to my right used that opportunity to double-tap the offender on the left. The man dropped to his knees, the assault rifle firing a final spread as his muscles tensed before his entire body went limp. He was dead. The second offender edged toward the back corner of the dark basement. "Stay back," he insisted, pressing the muzzle of his weapon into the ribcage of a scared, red-headed woman. "Take it easy," I said. "Just put the gun down and let the lady go. We won't hurt you, but you have to let her go." The officer to my left had taken cover behind a sideways table. He inched to the end and peered around the side. Before I could stop him, he fired. The shot missed, going high. "Stand down!" I ordered, but it was too late. The offender panicked. He pulled the trigger and darted for a second staircase I hadn't noticed. The 2 officers lit him up. In slow motion, I watched his blood paint the walls, and then I was moving. I rushed to the woman. She gasped and jerked on the floor. "Clear." I heard the declaration, but that was the least of my concerns. The officer who took the wayward shot disappeared up the hidden staircase. A few seconds later, he returned. "Clear." "She needs help. Are the paramedics here?" The officer on my right asked. He knelt beside me, assessing the woman's wound. "Not yet." I visually swept the room. "The offenders?" I asked the other cop. "Both down," he said. "Room's clear. What about upstairs?" "More units are sweeping it now." I held the woman's hand, feeling the tremors coursing through her. "You're safe now. Everything's going to be okay. Can you tell me your name?" But from the look of the wound, I feared my words might be lies. Her eyes were wide with fright, and she trembled uncontrollably, possibly from pain or fear. Martha." "It's okay, Martha. I'm Liv," I said as the other cop checked her pulse. "You're okay. Try breathing with me. Slow. In and out. Just like this," I demonstrated, even though calm was the last thing I felt right now. "The others." If she kept hyperventilating, she'd pass out. "You have to help them. They aren't safe. He's going to..." She gasped several times. "Move them." "Other women?" She nodded, moaning when the cop pressed down harder against the bullet wound in her abdomen. He met my eyes, the situation dire. Where are they? She jerked suddenly. He took them. He took us all. He found us, made us promises. Lies. So many lies. Who is he? What's his name? What does he look like? I squeezed her hand, hoping to reassure her. Stay with me, Martha. Her breath hitched, and she stared at the doorway. I turned to see my partner frozen near the stairs. He had his gun aimed out the door. Until the house was secured, we didn't know who else might be coming, and we weren't going to take any more chances. These assholes got the drop on us once. We weren't going to let them do it again. I turned the dial on my radio and hit the button. Are we clear? Not yet. We found a few hidden rooms. Checking for other hostiles now. Hang tight, came the response. We didn't have time for this. Martha didn't have time for this. Find the light switch, Fennel. Let's get the overheads on. As soon as the house is secure, we need the paramedics down here. Fennel ran his hand along the wall, locating a light switch. A single exposed bulb hung from a broken fixture in the ceiling, but it illuminated everything. On the floor in the corner of the room, curled into a ball, was a frail-looking girl. She was probably a few years younger than me, and she was dead. A second staircase led out of the room, and the other uniformed officer positioned himself at the foot of it. Blood spattered the walls and floors, and I sneered at the two dead men. Martha, hey, how many women did he take? I asked. 6. She swallowed. 6 of us in the room. He'd get us one at a time. Take us to clubs, to meets. But there were always 6. She shivered, her eyes glazing over. Even though the room looked like a scene from a horror film, the light helped ease her fears. It kept her talking, or so I hoped. The alternative was she'd lost too much blood and didn't have much time left. Tell me about the man. What's his name? What did he look like? Where did he take you? They call him Mr. X. Her head fell back, and her eyes lost focus. Martha, stay with me. She started jerking uncontrollably. She's seizing, the cop said. Hold her head. Fennel, we can't wait. She can't wait. My partner turned and raced up the steps. Until the house was cleared, paramedics couldn't enter, but Brad would find a way. Or he'd grab their gear and do it himself. She'd be okay. She had to be. Find something we can use, I ordered the other officer. Towels, blankets, anything. He looked around the room. I don't see anything. He paused. I got empty syringes over here and a needle in the dead girl's arm. Do you think she's ODing? Get the Narcan, the other officer instructed, while I pulled up Martha's sleeves and checked for puncture marks. What the hell were these assholes doing to these women? Martha stopped seizing, but she lost consciousness. Her breathing came in shallow, ragged gasps, and her pulse was thready. We were losing her. I don't know, but we didn't even know he had her. And 5 more are unaccounted for. My eyes came to rest on the dead woman in the corner. Martha said 6, but according to my math, we were up to 8. I didn't want to think how high the number might go. Heavy footsteps sounded on the stairs, and I drew my weapon. Fennel appeared in the doorway with the telltale blue bag boasting the EMS emblem. He knelt beside us and checked her breathing and pulse. He lifted one of her eyelids and shook his head. I noticed his free hand clench into a fist. Is it a through and through? Fennel asked, and the other cop felt beneath her. Yeah. Fennel blinked. Okay. I moved out of the way and let Brad work. We'd all gone through the same first responder training at the academy, but since Brad was former military and had seen combat, he also knew a thing or two about field medicine. Right now, he was her best chance. I took up watch at the door. A moment later, the other cop returned with the Narcan spray. Since Martha had puncture marks, dilated pupils, and a seizure, we couldn't be certain she wasn't ODing. But I hated to think about the kind of pain she'd be in without the drugs coursing through her system. For a moment, I wished Emma was here. She'd know what to do. The radio chirped. "The house is clear. Send paramedics. We have a woman down. GSW to the abdomen and a possible OD," I radioed back. The paramedics made quick work transferring Martha to a gurney. In a flash, they went up the stairs and loaded her into the back of the ambulance. I sent a patrol car with them. Given everything that occurred, Martha would be under police protection until we found Mr. X and the rest of the assholes who did this to her. The officer who'd been shot sat in the back of a second ambulance while the medics tended to his wounds. The bullet didn't penetrate his vest, but he already had the beginnings of an ugly bruise. He'd feel that for the next few days. I stared at the car. It felt like we'd been under attack inside the house for hours, but it had only been a few minutes. Additional units arrived, and I updated them on the situation and handed out assignments and orders. By the time I turned around, uniforms were escorting the 2 men we subdued out of the house. Fennel followed behind them. They weren't talking. Maybe they didn't speak English, or perhaps they were pretending not to understand. Either way, it would make getting answers a lot harder. "Liv!" Brad took a step toward me, just as an echoing crack tore through the chatter. "Down!" He dove on top of me before the word left his mouth. Immediately, he rolled to the side, taking cover behind the rear of the police cruiser. Splayed on the ground behind us was one of the 2 offenders. The bullet impacted between his eyes and covered the officer escorting him down the steps in spatter. Thankfully, he wasn't hit. "Everyone down!" Brad commanded. His eyes scanned the nearby rooftops. "Does anyone have eyes on the shooter?" I aimed skyward, searching. Another crack sounded. "There!" I pointed, just as the sniper grabbed his gun and left his perch. "I got him." 18. He stared through the scope of the modified hunting rifle. The police would call it an assault weapon, but until now, he'd only used it to put down a few 10-point bucks and several geese. He thought shooting people would feel different, but oddly, it didn't. He lined up the shot and adjusted to the left. Only one thing mattered. He couldn't kill a cop. That was an automatic death sentence, and a line he would not cross. He fired again. This time, Dimitri went down. He scanned the area. An ambulance had already taken off with one of the women. He wouldn't be able to do anything about that now. The other ambulance remained. Apparently, his people weren't smart enough not to shoot at cops. It's probably why more of his men weren't being hauled outside in cuffs. In fact, he didn't see any of his people, just the 2 Russians. The female detective pointed up at him. She and her partner disappeared across the street, taking cover along the buildings. It was time to go. Hopefully, anyone who could lead the police to him was dead. He grabbed his rifle, slung it over his shoulder, and slid down the exterior ladder. The police were half a block away and closing fast. He didn't have time to waste. They were coming for him. He reached into his pocket and remotely started his car's engine and unlocked the doors. Jumping inside, he knocked the gear shift into drive and peeled out of the parking space. As he watched the 2 detectives grow smaller in his rearview mirror, he wished he'd taken care of everything himself. If he'd dealt with Ingrid instead of sending Keith to do it, none of this would have happened. Instead, his life had turned upside down. He should have gone home hours ago, instead of spending that time outside the motel, fearing the police would return. He knew they'd be back, so he listened to the police scanner app on his phone. If he hadn't been paranoid enough to do that, he wouldn't have known units were rolling on Tremont. He wouldn't have had to shoot Dmitri and Yuri, but he didn't trust them. They'd sell him out on orders from the Russian. At least the situation was handled. Now he just needed to make final arrangements for the auction. He'd thrown enough parties to know entertainment was key. He'd want distractions, just in case any of the potential buyers turned out to be undercover law enforcement or opportunistic rivals. He'd keep the merchandise caged in the back and take the bidders to see them one at a time. Silent auctions were always best, and this way, he could control the flow of information. Nothing else would go wrong. He wouldn't let it. Fuck! Fennel kicked a dumpster as the car sped away. He hit the radio, advising units of the black SUV moving west on Tremont. He called in an airship, but unless it was already in the vicinity, finding the correct black SUV in the city would take a miracle. I examined the empty spot where the car had been, but found nothing out of the ordinary. We checked the sniper's position, but he didn't leave anything behind. A few uniforms joined us and secured the scene. So much needed to be processed, and yet I didn't believe any of it would lead to fruition. "You okay?" I asked as we trudged back to the house. "No. Are you?" "Not really. I can barely think straight." I stared at the scene before us. Of the 6 men who opened fire inside the house, only one of them remained breathing, and from the looks of him, that could change at any moment. Whoever did this didn't want to leave any witnesses behind. He killed his own guys. "Are you sure he didn't miss?" I asked. "You pushed me out of the way." Fennel shook his head. "He wasn't shooting at us. He was shooting at them." Brad squinted into the distance, calculating the trajectory in his mind. He winced. "Are you sure you're okay, Liv?" I nodded, realizing there was a good chance I'd been in the way. If Brad hadn't intervened, I might be dead on the pavement too. At least we got Martha out, and no cops had been seriously injured. It was a small win, but if I didn't remind myself of it, I'd go mad. More units arrived, including ESU. The tactical unit swept the neighborhood and started a canvass. Many of the nearby residents came outside to see what the commotion was about. Uniforms taped off the street and kept them at bay. Fennel headed back inside. Even though CSU had a lot to process, we had to get started. We still hadn't found Clarissa, and time was running out. After everything I just witnessed, I knew it was unlikely we'd find her alive. "DeMarco," my partner called. "You need to see this." I followed Brad into the basement. He knelt beside the dead woman and held up a blood-smeared key card. I read the name on the card. Monthly Stay Condos. We need to get back there. Slipping on a pair of gloves, I checked her pockets for any other personal effects or an ID, but she didn't have anything else on her. "Do you think he abducted her from there?" Fennel swallowed. "I don't know. That's the 3rd time this investigation has brought us to that motel. It has to be linked." "Detectives," a tech called from the hidden staircase. "You'll want to see this." "I doubt it," I muttered. Brad looked down at the body. "I'm sorry," he whispered. He took a deep breath and stood. I recognized this ritual, and I braced myself for what was to come. Fennel led the way up the 2nd staircase. An officer stood off to the side, silently observing everything. The staircase led directly into a room. "There's no other way in or out," the tech said. "Just the stairs." Dirty sleeping bags and old blankets covered the floor. Several brackets against the wall turned my stomach. Brad nudged the edge of a thick rusted chain with the tip of his shoe. "That's just one of them. We counted 4 more. I knelt down, spotting small personal items. A hairbrush, A locket, a compact. They were kept here. They were prisoners. I felt sick. But they're not here now. No, Brad agreed. We'll have cadaver dogs check the property, the tech said. I nodded. My eyes met Brad's. We'd seen most of the house and heard what Martha said. This didn't read like some sicko kidnapper. This read like human trafficking, making this house a way station of sorts. Did we ID any of the shooters? We're working on it, the tech said. They didn't have identification on them. The serial numbers on their weapons were filed off. Probably bought illegally and obviously unregistered. What about the car outside? I asked. The tech shrugged. Thanks, Fennel said. Before I could ask more questions, the tech couldn't answer. We want everything bagged and tagged. Every single speck of dust needs to be analyzed. Yes, sir. Come on, Liv. Brad nodded at the stairs. Let's check the rest of the house. I noted the way his hands shook. The car led us here, but it didn't lead us to Clarissa. I just hoped something inside the house would. We began upstairs where we apprehended the two offenders. The bedroom didn't contain anything. No clothing, nothing. CSU would dust for prints and analyze any fibers or trace they happened upon, but I didn't think they'd find much. The bathroom had a few basic toiletries, and when I opened the cabinet beneath the sink, I found a stockpile of makeup, razors, shaving cream, and hair supplies. They wanted the women to look pretty. I rubbed my neck. The man who attacked me was in critical condition. His buddy was dead in the driveway. And while I might have wished them harm during the assault, I hoped he'd survive. We needed answers. Fennel cursed several times. How long do you think they've been operating in the area? Months? Maybe longer? The possibility made me nauseous. My cheek twitched, and I fought to keep the bile from rising in my throat. I need some air. Can you finish up in here? Yeah. He said something else, but I couldn't hear him over the rush of blood in my ears. On my way down the steps, I bumped into a couple of crime techs. I quickly gave them a heads up on what they'd find. You should see the main level, one of them said. It's a mess. And don't forget the basement, the other one added. A real bloodbath took place here. How many firefights were you in, DeMarco? 2, not counting outside. Here and the basement. Ask the other officers what happened on the main level. They'll know. I pushed my way outside, crossed the street, and stared into the horizon. Everything was a mess, and we were just getting started. 19. Of the 6 offenders, 5 were dead and 1 was critical. Their prints came back. They were Russian and Ukrainian. Interpol had a file on each of them, and they were wanted throughout Europe in connection with human trafficking and smuggling. I stared at their mugshots. I didn't recognize Yuri Ponovic, the one who tried to rip off Brad's head. But the one who attacked me and nearly crushed my windpipe, Dmitry Barkov, was our Hardy impersonator. According to Dr. Emerson, he only spoke to Laurel, not Hardy. So I didn't know if the bastard spoke English. Dmitry refused to speak to us in English, but that could have been a ploy. A delay tactic. As soon as the hospital gave us the go-ahead, I'd get answers out of him, one way or the other. I flipped through the photos, but I didn't spot Laurel anywhere. He remained in the wind. Maybe he was our shooter. Getting caught was never part of the plan. The men who attacked us inside that house might have done so to delay us as long as possible, so the sniper and his pals could escape with the women. But when the shooters failed to annihilate the police, the sniper came in and took care of any witnesses. Failure wasn't an option for these bastards, and my thoughts drifted back to Keith Richardson. Mr. X must be one sadistic piece of shit. We had to move fast before the body count rose again. Mac? I called across the bullpen. Did you get an ID on the tipster? She shook her head. We got the number. It tracks back to an unregistered burner. It was picked up out of state a few months ago. No luck on getting surveillance footage or an ID. Damn it. You really think one of these chuckleheads called to taunt you? I didn't think they wanted the police involved, especially after what happened. I don't know. Maybe one of them grew a conscience, or maybe the tipster is a key witness who knows where the women might be. Regardless, I need to speak to him. Did you try calling the number back? She asked unhelpfully. It's disconnected, probably dismantled and ditched. Didn't you ping it for a location? Her brow furrowed. Yeah, you're right. Sorry. She had her hands full with running IDs and checking the neighbor's home security systems for any lead on Mr. X and the missing women. Changing gears, I went in search of details on the car used in Clarissa's abduction. The vehicle had been dusted for prints. We found 3 unique sets in the trunk, one of which was a match to Clarissa Barron's. Since one set of prints in the trunk matched Clarissa Barron's, I knew the other 2 must belong to other victims. The interior of the car had been wiped. CSU found a few hairs on the driver's seat, which, based on length and color, probably matched Dimitri. The car wouldn't get us any closer to finding Clarissa or stopping this guy. It was just another waste of time. Barely any progress had been made on the rest of the house. I rubbed a hand down my face and reached for my coffee cup. I swallowed the remainder, wincing as my muscles constricted. The last time I caught a glimpse of my reflection, I had the beginnings of a bruise. By now, it must be full-blown. That would be fun to explain to Emma and my parents. Ugh, focus, Liv. I chided. Did you finish your report? Fennel asked, returning to his desk. Yeah, you? Almost. He clicked something on the computer. Martha's still in surgery. His eyes were shrouded in darkness. Hey, I began, but I didn't know what to say. You did what you could. We have to find them. They shot Martha up with drugs, and when that took too long, they shot her. And they killed the other one with an overdose. They didn't want any loose ends. Do we know Martha's last name? Or the other woman's identity? Brad shook his head, fighting the emotion off his face. They don't have records, so fingerprints were a bust. We're running them through the DMV database. Maybe we'll get lucky, but they're probably runaways or strays living on the fringe. No one reported them missing. I checked with missing persons and the FBI. We don't know who they are because no one noticed they were gone. He gulped down some air. How fucked up is that? This whole case is fucked up. I slammed my hand against the wall and stormed down the hallway. I couldn't find the missing women. I couldn't stop this on my own. I needed answers. A lead. A miracle. Something useful. And only Dimitri could provide the answers. We needed him alive. He had to make it. He just had to. After stabbing the button on the soda machine a dozen times, I gave it a good kick. The can of sparkling water fell into the dispenser with a loud thud. I would wait to drink that, Agent Peters warned. You should let it settle, or it might explode. It's not the only thing. I tapped the top of the can. What are you doing here? The prints you ran pinged in our system. The FBI's been notified to detain Dmitry Barkov. Get in line. And good luck getting him to talk. The prognosis isn't good. Peters rested his hips against the break room table and assessed me. What about the sniper? What can you tell me about him? He killed Yuri Panovic with a single shot. Nearly did the same to Dmitri, but Officer Gallo intervened. Not fast enough. I glared at Peters. You weren't there. You don't know what it was like. Why don't you tell me what it was like? It's in my report. Maybe if you ask nicely, the brass will let you read it. I tried to push past him, but he blocked the exit. What do you want from me, Agent Peters? We're working this together, DeMarco. You've uncovered a human trafficking ring, and that's something the Bureau is better equipped to handle. The men who fired upon you are all Eastern Europeans. I've made some calls to our counterparts. They're sending us their files. Great. I am here to help. I know, but that won't bring back the women they've killed or sold. So tell me what I can do, Peters insisted. I wish I knew. We need to identify the women. Maybe if we figure out when and where they were taken, we'll be one step closer to identifying the man responsible. All right. And ask Mac about the tipster. Identifying him might put us one step closer to figuring out what's going on. Peters nodded, and I went out the door. One last thing, Detective. I stopped and turned. Good job. Peters said those words without a hint of sarcasm, but the sentiment still felt sarcastic. Congratulate me after we find Clarissa and the others, and these pigs get what's coming to them. He brushed his fingers against his neck and jerked his chin at me. Did someone get a hold of you? Dimitri. I'm surprised he made it out of the house alive. That looks serious. Did you have a medic check it out? I'm fine. Do your best to stay that way. Before I could reply, Peters walked away. It was for the best. I was itching for a fight, and despite his attempts to be helpful, the FBI agent had all the makings of a perfect punching bag. Damn, I needed to get out of here before I did something I'd regret. I spoke briefly to the captain and returned to my desk. I can't stay here another minute. I need to regroup. Maybe clear my head. Fennel nodded. Me too. I'm buying. I don't think that's a good idea. Yeah, well, I do. Fennel grabbed his jacket and looked around the bullpen. Cases like this can stretch on for weeks or months. We won't solve it in a night, no matter how badly we want to. If we don't step away, we'll burn out. Actually, it might have already happened. And after everything that went on today, we need to blow off some steam. They'll call us if they need us. That's why we need to keep a clear head. We're not clear now. He made a valid point. Come on, what else are you going to do? Again, another good point. Fine, but we're not going overboard. This case has taken too much out of us. I can't worry about anyone or anything else. You tell me all the time you don't have a problem, so prove it. Brad chuckled. I have a lot of problems, Liv, but grabbing a drink with you isn't one of them. 20. After a few drinks, Brad and I split a cab. The driver dropped him off, and I changed my destination to the hospital. I wasn't in any condition to work, but I couldn't go home. I needed to fix things with Emma, and I wanted to see how Martha was doing. I spent hours sitting in the ER waiting room. For once, it wasn't busy, and I took an unobtrusive spot in the back corner beneath the TV. I let my eyes close while I listened to the local station. Given the time, the programming went from infomercials to early morning news. My head bobbed, and I turned on my side and rested my cheek against the wall. Martha was in the ICU. They wanted to give her time to recover and regain some strength before attempting another surgery. I didn't know what her odds were, and I hated the part of me that wished I'd questioned her harder or gotten more answers out of her before she lost consciousness. She might be the only one who could save the other women, and now it might be too late. Dimitri wasn't in any better shape. He coded on the table. They managed to restart his heart, but he wouldn't be talking anytime soon, if at all. The doctors put him into a medically induced coma until they could figure out the best way to deal with his injuries. At least all the cops made it out alive. CSU recovered 4 assault rifles, 3 shotguns, and 6 handguns. We had been outmanned and outgunned, but we survived. As I drifted in and out of consciousness, I wondered how we could have been so lucky, when these women weren't. Liv, Emma nudged my shoulder. What are you doing here? She looked up and waved at the nurse working the intake desk. Jen says you've been sitting here for hours. Protection details usually guard patient rooms, not the waiting room. So what's the deal? I tried to straighten, but my muscles were stiff and sore. I'm sorry, Em. Have you been drinking? Yeah. She laughed. It figures. That's the only reason you ever apologize. Do you want a banana bag? No, I'm not drunk. And I don't think I'm hungover. I just feel like shit, but I am sorry. I just have no intention of doing anything to change it. Emma plucked a twig out of my ponytail. Do I want to know? No. But I told her as much as I could anyway. I don't want to fight with you. And I don't want to worry you or scare you. Even after the day you had, you still want to do this? She asked. No, I want to do better. I want to find them. I have to. I turned fully in my seat, and she eyed the bruises in the shape of Dimitri's fingers. No matter what happens. Okay, wait right here. She went to the desk and spoke to Jen. Then she returned to the chair beside me. Taxi's coming. It'll take you home. You need to get some sleep. Try some hot compresses. I have a wrap you can microwave in the top drawer of my dresser, and there's a tube of arnica in the bathroom. Do I need to make a house call, or is Brad in better shape than you? He fought a guy, but he's okay. I shrugged. So am I. For once in your life, Liv, do what I say. She gave me a hug. Now get some sleep. There's something else. I bit my lip. Now didn't feel like the time, but I needed to tell her. I talked to the captain. Until we get this figured out, I'll be staying closer to the action. You're going under again? It's mainly surveillance. We need to keep an eye out. Fine, but go home and get some sleep first, okay? Okay, Em. I let out a sigh, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. But only if you promise not to tell my mom about any of this. Reluctantly, she stuck out her hand. Deal. Sleep didn't make me feel any better, but on the plus side, it didn't make me feel worse. After packing a bag, I went to the station. The parking lot was full of federal vehicles. That was never good. I grabbed the 2 cups from my cup holders and went inside. The conference room was filled with suits and police personnel. This would be about as much fun as a root canal. Fennel leaned against the edge of the table, and I slipped inside and handed him a cup. You look about as good as I feel, he said. He looked down at the travel cup. I brought you coffee too. It's on your desk. Not coffee. Emma's hangover cure. He hid his grin behind the cup. You made up. I ignored the comment. What's going on? I whispered. Interagency task force. Peters didn't want us to have all the fun. He took a sip and jerked his chin at the man giving the briefing. Since Dimitri had been identified as one of the 2 men who stole a van from the FBI motor pool, and alerts had been issued concerning him and his partner, it wasn't much of a stretch for the feds to get involved. Furthermore, it was human trafficking, a crime with international implications. But since it involved several local homicides, we weren't giving up the case without a fight. We already sunk our teeth into it. If it wasn't for our police work, the feds wouldn't know about any of this. We still haven't ID'd the man who jumped off the roof, and we don't know the identity of the woman from the alley. We've handed their information over to the European authorities. Maybe they know something we don't, the agent in charge of the briefing said. What about the shooters from yesterday? Officer Roberts asked. What do we know about them? We have files on them. The intel is provided in your briefing notes, but suffice it to say, They're believed to work for a human trafficking ring operating in Eastern Europe. At this time, we've only positively identified one of their known associates, an Oleg Vorshkovich. He and Dmitry Barkov are the two men who stole the bodies from the morgue. We issued a bolo for Oleg. "Do you think he's our sniper?" I asked. The agent shrugged. "I don't want to speculate." "What else do you have?" Grayson asked. "And feel free to speculate." "At this time, we don't have any other names. Our contacts overseas are investigating. Hopefully, they'll help us find a local connection." "And the women?" I asked. The agent focused on me, but he didn't answer. "Like I said, we're investigating. The FBI is equipped to handle this." Captain Grayson turned to look at me. His eyes darted to the door, and I knew the answers wouldn't be forthcoming in this briefing. Luckily, the rest of the briefing didn't take that long. Our support teams would serve the biggest role in the task force. Other than that, it was back to business as usual for the rest of us. Well, most of us. When they were dismissed, the captain led us into his office and closed the door. "The hospital won't give us access to Martha Evans or Dmitry Barkov while they remain critical." "Are they conscious?" I asked. "Maybe Emma could call in some favors on our behalf." "No." Grayson rubbed his mouth and stared out the slats of the blinds. "The female DB in the basement was another local. Sister Mary Catherine recognized her but didn't have a name. I showed the Vic's photo to Vice. They recognized her as Claudia Arroyo. She was one of their CIs. "How is that possible?" I asked. "I didn't think she had a record. Her prints didn't come back." "She was never formally booked. Detective Lazar worked her the old way." Grayson didn't say much, but since he had been my father's partner, I knew he didn't like it when cops cut corners. "Lazar arrested her, filled out the paperwork, and conveniently lost it when she agreed to work for him. He kept her as a confidential informant, off the books. I pulled her file, but it doesn't provide any identifying information. He swears it's her, and we have no reason to doubt him." "Who is she informing on?" Fennel asked. "Local pimps and clubs running girls. Her tips resulted in busts that uncovered other things. Based on the records I've seen, she was making decent money on her tips. When she disappeared 6 months ago, Lazar figured she made enough and decided to cash out. He thought that's why he hadn't seen her." "Do you think that's when she was abducted?" I asked. "Have these pricks been operating in our city for half a year without us noticing?" "I don't know." Grayson stopped speaking when Agent Peters went past his door. "Anyway, I asked Lazar about the monthly stay condos, but Vice doesn't know anything about them. They've stayed off the radar, but like I told DeMarco yesterday, since our Vic had a room key, we need to check it out. I sent some uniforms to question the employees. No one recognized Claudia Arroyo, and there's no reservation in her name." "What about cash under the table?" Fennel asked. "When I asked the clerk for information, he made it very clear this is a no-tell motel." "That's why we're going to have to conduct some surveillance." Grayson looked at me. "Thanks for volunteering, Liv." "I have to do something." Fennel gave me a funny look, noting how the captain grew quiet when a few more FBI agents lingered near his office door. "What's going on, Captain?" Grayson lowered his voice. "This doesn't feel right. These assholes waltz into a federal building and steal a vehicle, but the feds know nothing about it. Then, when we finally identify one of the pricks, the feds join our case. It doesn't smell right to me." Grayson thought someone on the inside was involved. "What do you want us to do?" Fennel asked. "Stay on it." He looked at me. "Are you sure no one at the motel made you as a cop?" "I don't think so. I was with Fennel, but I let him ask the questions while I took in the sights." "All right. Get a room. I'll assign a second team to assist. We're already short-staffed, but this is important. What about the connection to the community center? Fennel asked. Are we still pursuing that? Grayson shuffled through some pages on his desk. Uniforms were waiting outside when they opened their doors this morning. Claudia Arroyo was never there. We even checked the clinic's records, but she wasn't a patient. Just keep an eye on them. But our focus at the moment is finding the sniper, the missing women, and Oleg Vorshkovich. And I don't believe we'll find them there. Even though everything points to strays being taken off the streets by international criminals, Keith Richardson, or whatever the fuck his name is, wasn't Russian or Ukrainian. He was a local, and he targeted these women. We know he worked at the community center and stalked the neighborhood. Maybe these Russian pricks did the same thing. The community center probably wasn't their only hunting ground, but it might be the epicenter, I said. Keith probably grabbed the women and delivered them to Dmitri and his pals. But someone, maybe one of the Europeans, forced Keith to kill Jane Doe. And given the dead woman we found inside the house and Martha's condition, I'd say whoever convinced Keith to jump off that roof is part of this human trafficking ring. Fennel added, we need to find them and question them. These are still our suspects. They tried to kill us. What the hell do the feds have to do with that? Not a damn thing, Grayson said. Divert whatever resources you need, but try to keep this under wraps. I don't want Agent Peters or his team interfering with our surveillance until we know what we're dealing with. You don't trust them? I asked. I wish I did, but trust has to be earned. We'll see how it goes. 21. I tucked my badge into my pocket, combed my fingers through my hair, and touched up my makeup. Mac had put a rush on a new undercover identity, and the department gave me a prepaid credit card registered to my new alias. Hopefully, it was enough to cover the motel's 2-week minimum stay requirement. Brad entered the locker room. What are you doing? Trying not to look like a cop? I know that. I meant, why didn't you tell me about this cockamamie plan of yours yesterday? It's not a plan, it's surveillance. Brad picked up a tube of mascara. I didn't realize you had to get gussied up to conduct surveillance. He put the mascara down. Spill DeMarco. After we spoke to the captain, I made a few calls. It turns out Rogers and Stein has a block of rooms reserved at the motel. That makes sense, given what we know about modeling agencies and Clarissa's hopes and dreams. I told Brad about the women I encountered during our first trip to the motel. I phoned ADA Winters. We got a court order for the motel records. None of the names popped out, but a few of the condos are rented out long-term under corporate accounts. We're running down the businesses now, but if one of them turns out to be a front for these human traffickers, I don't want to risk tipping them. So you're trying to blend in with the Rogers and Stein crowd? Or the Clarissa, Martha, Jane Doe crowd, I replied. You couldn't attract attention on the street in fishnets and high heels. You really think you'll attract attention with a little mascara? Maybe I'll hang a red light outside my door. That ought to do something. What about the room key we found on the body? The strip's been wiped or demagnetized, whatever Max said. She couldn't pull any data off it, so we have no idea what room it unlocked. And the motel staff refuses to cooperate. They claim they don't recognize Claudia. I put on some lip balm. I hate this. I'm coming with you, Brad insisted. The hell you are? You spoke to the clerk on 2 separate occasions. He'll recognize you. We'll see about that. No, we won't. Brad reached for another tube of makeup, and I grabbed it out of his hand and swept the supplies into my purse. In case you've forgotten, I've done my fair share of undercover work. I can disguise myself and blend in just as well as you can, DeMarco. He had a determined look on his face. Women are disappearing. I won't let that happen to you. Maybe it should. That might be the only way we find them. Fennel sighed and went out the door. After I changed clothes, I found him waiting for me at the stairs. Grayson's putting a second team on the motel, but Mac's still working on their cover identities. They'll register later tonight, so until then, I'll be staking out the motel from the diner across the street. Should anything occur, I'll be right there. You should stay here. We haven't found Clarissa, and time's running out. If it hadn't already. You wouldn't be doing this if you thought it was a dead end, Fennel said. And like I tell you all the time, I go where you go, partner. Plus, it'll give me a chance to question David and a few others from the community center. I hear they have a planning meeting this evening at the diner. He grinned. 2 birds, 1 stone. I smiled. Jerk. Be nice and I'll consider springing for snacks. After selecting a vehicle from the motor pool, Brad gave me a lift to the motel. He dropped me off near the bus stop, and I grabbed my duffel and walked the 3 blocks to the motel. I looked up at the monthly stay sign. This was the place where dreams went to die. The lobby was drab, not nearly as bright or overly commercial like the chain motels. The clerk hung up the phone and asked for my name and information. While I waited for the ancient contraption currently impersonating a computer to verify everything, a large group of blonde women waltzed into the lobby to grab some fresh towels. I'd guess none of them was older than 22, and based on the clothes, shoes, and designer accessories they donned, they had to be models. "Excuse me," I said. "Are you with Rogers and Stein?" The nearest woman looked at me. "No." Before I could ask anything else, the clerk cleared his throat impatiently. "Miss Torrey," the desk clerk repeated, and I realized I was zoning out. "Here is your room key. I have you down for a 2-week stay, but you can extend it for as long as you need. We offer a continental breakfast from 6 to 10 every morning. The fitness room is on the 2nd floor. Ice machines are on each level. If you have any problems or questions, please let me know." "Thanks." I took the key. "Room 201, right?" "Sure thing." By the time I stepped outside, the women were gone. I glanced across the parking lot in the direction of the diner. Brad sat near the window, watching everything. I went up the steps and slid the key through the slot. When the light turned green, I pushed the door open and turned on the light before entering. Once I was sure the room was clear, I checked the adjoining door. It led to room 202, but the other side was locked. Based on motel records, no one was staying there. The other surveillance team might want to share the adjoining room, or they'd spread out and find something on the other side of the motel. It was their call, not mine. Settling onto the bed, I dialed Brad. "Did you see the women?" "Yes, but I didn't spot anyone I recognized." "Neither did I, but they fit the profile." I asked, but they denied being part of Rogers and Stein. Getting up, I opened the drape and stared outside. Since I was the first room near the stairs, I had a decent vantage point. Although I couldn't help but think the first floor might be better, except it was already filled. "Did you see where they went?" "They went back to their room. They're in 205. "Okay. Don't let the diner food kill you. I'm going to get some ice and check out the vending machines, and see if I can make friends with my new neighbors." "Good luck." "You too." For the middle of the day, the motel wasn't very lively. I grabbed the ice bucket and went to check the ice machine. The drapes were drawn on 205, and the only sounds coming from within were from the television. I considered knocking, but it was too soon. That would be suspicious. I had to be patient. It was the nature of surveillance, and normally I was better suited to let things play out naturally. After partially filling the ice bucket, I went up to the top floor and walked the length. The final room, 526, had a sign on the door indicating it was for maintenance. I backtracked to the vending machines and checked their offerings, pretending to have an extreme fascination with various flavors of potato chips, before repeating the process on the other levels. On the bright side, the vending machine offerings varied by floor, making my trek less suspicious. Reading the sign, I slid my keycard into the slot and peered into the fitness room. 2 treadmills, a few bikes, an elliptical, a glider, a yoga ball, and a few free weights made up the tiny fitness room. No one was inside, and from the musty odor, I suspected it wasn't particularly popular among the guests. Eventually, I returned to my room, took a seat at the table, and spent the rest of the day watching for suspicious activity, while calling to check on the progress Mac and the rest of the task force was making. My eyes drifted to the diner, and I wondered how Brad was doing. He remained near the window, but his focus was turned inward. I spotted several new cars in the parking lot, and used my phone's camera to zoom in on the plates. I wrote them down on the motel stationery in case we needed additional information. My mind went back to the anonymous tipster. He knew where the car was, and he wanted us to hurry. He must have known the women would be moved or killed. Or he wanted us to be ambushed. I couldn't decide if he was friend or foe. But the human traffickers had to know we were onto them, which meant they'd be unloading their cargo as soon as possible. "What the hell are you doing, Liv?" I asked the empty room. At this precise moment, surveillance seemed like the biggest waste of time. And then my phone rang. "Get over here now," Fennel said. I pulled the drape, put the do not disturb on the door, and raced across the parking lot. By the time I got to the diner, Brad was waiting in the car. I slid into the seat beside him, and he pulled out of the parking lot. "What's going on?" I asked. "I don't know. David and those other idiots were talking about fundraising, so I got bored and happened to look out the side window. A group of women got herded into a child molester van. I didn't get a good look at the driver, but he was tall and thin. It might have been Vorshkovich." "A child molester van?" "You know, the dingy white vans without any windows or logos on them. The kind child molesters use." "You watch too much TV." Brad shrugged. "Let's hope that's all it is." Within 2 blocks, we caught up to the van. Brad pulled up beside it, and I recognized the woman seated in the passenger seat. "She's from the motel. Should we call it in?" "Not yet." Fennel didn't want to tip our hand prematurely. "Let's follow it for a while." "Okay." Fennel dropped back, letting a few cars get between us. The driver didn't behave erratically. He obeyed traffic laws to the same degree as most other motorists. He turned, and we followed. The light turned red, and the van stopped. No one tried to escape out the back, but my mind was already on worst-case scenarios. My fingers brushed against the radio, while my other hand remained poised near my gun. Brad realized how tense I was. "What did you and Emma fight about?" he asked. "My job." The light turned green, and I watched the buildings go by. "She's worried about me. And it's your fault. She thinks I should quit my job and do something less dangerous." "You're joking." "Nope." "How the hell could she even suggest something like that?" "She got the idea from my mom. My mother has been harping on this my entire life. I'm sure my dad's gotten it far worse. She hated that I became a cop. She spent her life worrying about him not coming home, and now she has to worry about me not coming home. When you freaked out Emma called my mom. The intervention will probably be in a few days. Let me know when you get the invite." Brad slowed, letting another car pull in between us and the van. "I'm sorry, Liv. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I just worry about you, about us. I'd hate to see what Emma would do if she found out what went down yesterday." "I already told her and swore her to secrecy." My eyes narrowed as the van put on its blinker and turned into the valet line for a trendy club. "How did she take it?" "We're okay, I think. It probably depends how long-term this assignment is. Do you even think it's worth it? I spent the day in that motel room thinking I should be at the precinct doing something else. I want to be in the vicinity. If I am, maybe this will stop happening, and no more women will be taken or killed, since I'll be close enough to intervene. But it feels like it's too late for that. I reached for the radio and asked for details on the van's plate. The plate came back clean. At this point, I didn't know if that was good or bad. Brad drove past the turn for the valet stand and parked in the first spot he found. Turning around, I watched the women climb out of the vehicle and head into the club. We followed them inside. Half of them crowded around the bar, while the other half searched for a table. We scouted the place, but didn't spot any persons of interest, or any particularly nefarious characters. "Keep an eye on the driver," Brad said. "I'll speak to the ladies and get the lay of the land." 45 minutes later, I met up with Brad at the front door. This was a waste of time. Let's call it in. Someone else can sit on this place and make sure the women get home safely. Our priority is keeping an eye on the motel, and with the women at the club, I'll have more time to check out their end of the hallway, I said.